gentlemen.
Matt, how are you?
How are you all doing?
Two's good enough. You never know, because Donald Trump could be the nominee. That's fantastic for you. That's right. No. Yes. I know. So I don't know how long this is going to take. There you go.
Yes, my love. Okay, so what's it called? Is that Secretary Johnson? Okay, and when does that start? 10. And so it's 10. I'm not going to make the gavel down there. So I'm making the gavel here. And what meetings are at what time? Like what my schedule is. And always the problem is it's online enhanced, you know? Yes, and you can see who we need to film. When did we get here?
Yeah. But we weren't sure if you wanted to do it.
Is that more important than here?
Yeah, I think either way.
I am. So,
No questions for both.
don't we stay here, ask some questions, and then move over to,
We're going to be making open.
oh, for a long time. It's 15 minutes. We should just stay here and get through here, and then we'll go back because we've already missed Gavel over there anyway.
Okay.
And so wherever these fall, might be easier to hold them at the office and then move them over to Cannon than to move them here. So you decide. You just let me know. Okay.
We have one request to Matt. I know you've got your own statement, but would you mind having
For Mr. Smith? Absolutely. Sure.
Yeah, take it here. That's what we need. We have one more question. I don't know if this is on the screen, but why not?
We're here next week. We're here, when do I come in? Next week is the 23rd, right? I think that's
I think it's Wednesday.
Wednesday for sure. Wednesday I believe I can. Just make sure it's exactly.
I'll email Shane. You're in luck, man. Only the service secretaries are doing statements. Only the service secretaries. We're limited to 5 minutes. What's more to the breach? Yeah.
How you doing? Well, good. A good ride? I did. I was a little too proactive, I think. Leaning a little far ahead. I tried. But I figured you wouldn't come. Yeah. I really am now. Completely broken and dead on the inside. Been killed.
Paul.
Ma'am.
All right. Committee will come to order. Committee meets today to hear from the service secretaries and the service chiefs, and we are grateful to each of you for being here today. The director of the Defense Intelligence Agency testified earlier this month that the world is far more complicated, it is far more destabilized, it is far more complex than at any time we have seen. Just last month, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs testified before the Appropriations Defense Subcommittee. The joint force will be stressed to execute a major contingency operation to aggression by an adversary. We face a more dangerous world, and we face a stressed force and a high operational tempo, all major concerns for this committee. We talk a lot about readiness, but as one of our senior military leaders has said, the real bill payer for underfunded readiness is lost lives. And I think that helps bring it into context for all of us. Of course, the challenge in today's complex world is we can't just focus on one thing. We face everything from a serious nuclear threat from peer competitors to continuing threat of terrorism and aggression from a variety of actors. So we all face a number of challenges at the same time. I'm sure that we will explore a number of those issues over the course of this hearing, as well as the administration's budget request and how well it meets those challenges, both around the world and within our force. Finally, I'll just note that yesterday I made some proposals to improve our acquisition system. I don't expect that y'all have had time to look and react to those, but I do solicit your feedback on what you think is good and what you think could be better, and working with you as well as folks in OSD and obviously all of our colleagues and folks outside the building, we want to take further steps to improve the way that the Pentagon acquires goods and services. Before introducing our witnesses, I'll yield to the distinguished gentlelady from California who is sitting in for the ranking member, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being before us today. I want to thank you for all of your service. Before I begin, I would like to insert for the record, ask unanimous consent to put Mr. Smith's opening remarks in, please, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
So we live today in a world where the security environment is constantly changing, and so we have the responsibility to keep up with those changes. There are threats today that we're facing that we didn't know about even last year, and the threats are vast. And so I understand that all the services today that you face, you get pulled in so many different directions to defend and to protect our country and Americans. And so thank you for the service and the sacrifice. With the rise of ISIL and extremism, it's become pretty apparent that we have to use all elements of power with those growing threats today. And I do completely agree with the Secretary in his written statement in terms of the different elements of power, and each element is necessary for combination with the others. However, each alone is insufficient to win a war or maintain a peace. And in the last couple of years, it's become evident that military might alone is not enough to address the rising threats. The U.S. must take the necessary investments in diplomacy and economic stability and in collective security to be more effective against today's threats. It's time for us to further engage our partners so that we can prevent terrorist attacks like the one in the Ivory Coast. The U.S. cannot combat ISIL and terrorism alone, and we have to be able to rely on our regional allies militarily and financially as we continue to fight against terrorism. And we have a budget problem, and we all know that, and we can't fix this problem without addressing the defense budget. It's time not just for the services, but also for us in Congress to really sit down at the table and get down to the hard decisions, Mr. Chairman, to prioritize what we need and what is not a critical need. And we have to do that in the defense budget because it must be sustainable. As you said, a lack of resources is really a cost that none of us want to see. Before I conclude, and I hope that you'll speak to that, all of you, and I would also like to commend the Defense Department and the services for all your efforts in opening up the military occupation and positions to women. As the services go forward in integrating women into these positions, I believe that leadership will be key. And I hope to hear from you the steps that each of the services is doing in order to ensure that we get that done. We're celebrating Women's History Month right now. And for that reason in particular, I would like to recognize all those women who have served in our military and are currently serving. I believe that the full integration of women into military will not only open up the opportunities for these women, but they will enhance our readiness of our military. So I thank you, and I look forward to your testimony.
Thank the gentlelady. Let me again welcome our witnesses. We have Mr. Patrick Murphy, Acting Secretary of the Army, General Mark Milley, Chief of Staff of the Army, Honorable Ray Mabus, Secretary of the Navy, Admiral John Richardson, Chief of Naval Operations, General Robert Neller, Commandant of the Marine Corps, Honorable Deborah Lee Jones, Secretary of the Air Force, and General Mark Welch, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. For some of y'all, I think this may be your first opportunity to testify in this format. I do note Mr. Murphy was once on this side of the table, and now he's on that side. It'll be interesting to see whether people go easy on him or not. For some of y'all, this may be your last time to testify in this format. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Mrs. Welch, who is in the audience. One of the things that I have learned to appreciate is the full-time job which the spouses of our service chiefs occupy in supporting the force in their way, in the families. It is a tremendous asset for our country, and I appreciate all that you have done, not only to support General Welch over y'all's career, but what you have done to support all of the airmen who have served our country. And the same is true for all of your spouses. Without objection, your full written statements will be made part of the record, and we'd be pleased to hear any introductory comments you'd like to make. Secretary Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee. It's great to be back on this side of the dais, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss our Army with you here today. This is my 10th week on the job as Acting Secretary of the Army, and it's truly an honor to be back with my Army family. Now, I've traveled to see our soldiers, our civilians, and their families to Fort Hood, to Fort Sam Houston, and most recently to Iraq and Afghanistan. And let me tell you, the selfless service and dedication of our team should inspire all of us. We are tasked with the solemn responsibility to fight and win our nation's wars and to keep our families safe here at home. Our Army must produce ready units today to deter and defeat our nation's enemies, defend our homeland, project power, and win decisively. By ready, we mean units that are fully manned, trained for combat, fully equipped according to their design structure, and led by competent leaders. We must also be ready for our future fights by investing in modernization and research and development. We do not want our soldiers to have a fair fight. We want them to have the tactical and technical advantage over our enemies. With our $125.1 billion budget request, our Army will focus its efforts on rebuilding readiness for large-scale, high-end ground combat today. We do so because we believe that ignoring readiness shortfalls puts our nation at greatest risk for the following reasons. First, readiness wins wars. Our Army has never been the largest in the world. At times, we have not even been the best equipped. But since World War II, we have recognized that ready soldiers, properly manned, trained, equipped, and led, can beat larger or more determined forces. So whether we're confronting the barbaric acts of ISIS or the desperation of North Korea, our Army must be prepared to execute and to win. We train like we fight, and our Army must be ready to fight tonight. Next, readiness deters our most dangerous threats and assures our allies. We are reminded with alarming frequency that great power conflicts are not dead. Today, they often manifest themselves on a regional basis. Both Russia and China are challenging America's willingness and ability to enforce international standards of conduct. A ready Army provides America the strength to deter such actions and reassure our partners throughout the world. Readiness also makes future training less costly. Continuing operations since 2001 have left our force proficient in stability operations and counterterrorism, but our future command sergeants major and brigade commanders have not had the critical combat training center experiences as junior leaders trained for high-end ground combat. Investing in readiness today builds a foundation necessary for long-term readiness. Finally, readiness prepares our force for potential future conflicts. We can't keep fighting the last fight. Our Army must be prepared to face the high-end and advanced combat power of an aggressive Russia, or more likely, Russian aggression employed by surrogate actors. This budget dedicates resources to develop solutions, to allow our force the space to develop new concepts informed by the recommendations of the National Commission on the Future of the Army. Our formations must first be ready to execute against current and emerging threats. The choice, though, to invest in near-term readiness does come with risk. Smaller modernization investments risk our ability to fight and win in the future. We have no new major modernization programs this decade. Smaller investments in end strength risk our ability to conduct multiple operations for sustained periods of time. In short, we're mortgaging our future readiness because we have to ensure success in today's battles against emerging threats. It's why initiatives that we asked for, like BRAC in 2019, are needed to be implemented now. Let us manage your investment, and this will result in $500 million a year in savings and a return on investment within 5 years. And lastly, while we thank Congress for the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015, which provides short-term relief and 2 years of predictable funding, we request your support for the enactment of our budget as proposed. We request your support, your continued funding levels calibrated to current threats and to our national security interests. And we request your support, your continued support, for our soldiers, civilians, and their families, so that our Army remains the most capable fighting force possible to fight and win our nation's wars and to keep our families safe here at home. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. My understanding is that only the service secretaries have introductory comments. Is that correct? Secretary Mabus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman Sanchez, on behalf of Ranking Member Smith, members of this committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about the Department of the Navy. As you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, this is the first budget testimony for our new Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson, and for the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Neller. In the time since they took these positions, I've had the privilege of their frank, professional, and invaluable counsel. They are officers of the highest caliber who expertly lead our Navy and Marine Corps during ever-tightening fiscal constraints and an increasingly dynamic threat environment. This is my 8th time, and my last, to appear before you. For me, leading the Department of the Navy is the greatest honor of my life. I couldn't be more proud of our sailors, Marines, civilians, their families. I'm also proud of the many steps we've taken and changes we've made to ensure that the Navy and Marine Corps remain the greatest expeditionary fighting force the world has ever known. First and foremost, we continue to provide presence. That unrivaled advantage on, above, beneath, and from the seas gives our leaders options in times of crisis, reassures our allies, and deters adversaries. There is no next best thing to being there. Maintaining that presence requires gray hulls on the horizon. While there's been some discussion about posture versus presence, the simple fact is for the Navy and Marine Corps, our posture is presence. In every case, from high-end combat to irregular warfare to disaster relief, our naval assets get on station faster, stay longer, bring whatever we need with us, and since we operate from our ships, which are sovereign American territory, we can act without having to ask any other nation's permission. Resourcing that presence depends on 4 fundamentals, 4 Ps: people, our sailors and Marines; platforms, our ships, our aircraft, our systems; power, how we use energy to make us better warfighters; and partnerships, our relationships with international allies, industry, and most importantly, with the American people. When I took this post almost 7 years ago, we had an incredibly committed and capable force, but each of these 4 Ps was under pressure. Our people have been stressed from high operational tempo and extended deployments. Our fleet was shrinking, and too many of our platforms were costing too much. Our use of power was a vulnerability, and our partners were seeking reassurance of our sustained engagement. Now our people, platforms, power, and partnerships are stronger than they've been in many years, enabling us to provide that invaluable presence. In people, we've instituted sweeping changes, personnel policy. Promotions are based more on merit and less on tenure, and commanding officers are empowered to meritoriously promote more sailors and Marines. We've made career paths more flexible. And one example, thanks to Congress, is the Career and Mission Program, which has been greatly expanded. We've also increased professional development and educational opportunities that bring America's best ideas to the fleet by adding 30 graduate school slots through our Fleet Scholars Education Program and sending high-performing sailors on SecNav industry tours to great American companies like FedEx and Amazon, where they learn private sector best practices that can be applied when they return. We are absolutely committed, from leadership to the deck plates, on combating the crime of sexual assault and the tragedy of suicide. We have revamped our physical fitness assessments, making them more realistically aligned with the jobs we do, and we promoted healthier lifestyles through better nutrition and a culture of fitness. All billets in both services are now open to women. Standards will absolutely not be lowered, but anyone who can meet the standards will be able to do the job. This will make us a more combat-effective force. We're trying to mitigate stress on sailors and Marines and their families by making deployments more predictable, extending hours for child care, and creating co-location policies. To tap into the innovative culture inherent in the Navy and Marine Corps, we established Task Force Innovation, which takes good ideas from deck plate sailors and field Marines, recognizes funds, and rapidly moves these ideas fleet-wide. On platforms, we've reversed the decline in ship count, and thanks to Congress, and in particular to this committee, our Navy will reach 300 ships by 2019, and we will get to our assessed need of 308 ships by 2021. In the 7 years before I took office, the Navy contracted for 41 ships. In my 7 years, we've contracted for 84, and we've done so while increasing aircraft purchases by 35%, all with a smaller top line. Practices like firm fixed-price contracts, multi-year buys, stable requirements have driven down cost on virtually every class of ship. And we're also in the process of recapitalizing nearly every naval aviation program. We've expanded unmanned systems on, under, and above the sea and put increased focus on them by establishing a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Unmanned and an Office of Unmanned Warfare System on the C&O staff, N99, designed specifically to coordinate all unmanned programs. We're also implementing advanced energy technologies like electromagnetic railguns and laser weapons. In power, to increase our lethality and operational flexibility, I set goals of having 50% of sea and shore-based energy derived from alternative sources by 2020, competitive with the price of conventional power. We met that goal ashore at the end of last year. Energy efficiency has also been greatly increased on our bases and at sea. Ultimately, since 2009, both the Navy and Marine Corps have achieved large drops in oil consumption. In partnerships, during my tenure, I've traveled nearly 1.2 million air miles to 144 different countries and territories, visiting with our sailors, Marines, our allies, and our partners. 12 of my trips have been to Afghanistan, where I visited every Marine Corps forward operating base and helmet to be with our forward deployed men and women. And I've actively engaged with our allies and friends around the world to build and maintain a network of navies with whom we can train, operate, and trust. And we have worked in partnership with Congress to fulfill the constitutional mandate to provide for and maintain a Navy. As President George Washington once said, it follows then, as certain as night succeeds the day, that without a decisive naval force, we can do nothing definitive. With it, everything honorable and glorious. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Congresswoman Sanchez, and all the members of the committee. Good morning. My wingman, General Welsh, and I are very proud to come before you today to represent the nearly 660,000 active duty, National Guard, Reserve, and civilian airmen, plus all of our families. And we're certainly very honored to be here with our colleagues from the sister services as well. When we testified before all of you last year, we outlined our three priorities, which are taking care of people, balancing readiness with our needs for modernization, and making every dollar count. These priorities have not changed over the last year, but what has changed, and you've already touched upon it, Mr. Chairman, is the threats that are facing our nation. As we sit here today, our Air Force is working very, very hard to degrade with the goal of ultimately destroying Daesh in the Middle East as part of a whole of government and as part of a coalition approach. In the last year, our coalition forces upped the ante against Daesh, flying more than 55,000 sorties in support of Operation Inherent Resolve, which represents a threefold increase over the number of sorties in 2014. Moreover, a resurgent Russia continues to foment problems in the Ukraine and has announced its intent to modernize its nuclear forces. And of course, we are watching and we are waiting to see what happens next in Syria. In addition, we've observed North Korea conduct an illegal nuclear test and a rocket launch just within the last month or so. And we continue to see worrisome activity in the from China in the South China Sea. And of course, there are also very important growing threats in both space and cyberspace. And the bottom line here is that our Air Force is playing an absolutely essential role in each of these areas. We are fully engaged in every region of the world, in every mission area, and across the full spectrum of operations. And to put it plainly, in my opinion, we have never been busier on such a sustained and global basis, and we are doing all of this with roughly 200,000 fewer people and 79 fewer fighter squadrons than we had at the time of Operation Desert Storm. So we are a much, much smaller Air Force. Now, to continue confronting these challenges and in order to maintain an effective fighting force, our budget submission, which is now before you, tries to balance capacity, capability, and readiness appropriately. As has been mentioned, the Bipartisan Budget Act, we're very, very appreciative of the stability and the predictability that that gives us, but it does leave us somewhat short, $3.4 billion short for the Air Force as compared to what we originally requested for FY17. So this means that once again we had some tough choices to make in this budget. And I'll detail those budget choices as I discuss our top 3 priorities, and I want to begin with the most important one, and that's taking care of people. Airmen and their families are the Air Force's most important resource, and our budget, I believe, reflects this truth. But with that said, as I just mentioned, we have been downsizing for years, and our people are very stressed, and this simply needs to stop. We now need to upsize our force modestly, and we want to do it in a total force way to address a number of key areas, including critical career fields like intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, cyber, maintenance across the Air Force, and battlefield airmen. These are some of the areas that we need to plus up. We thank this committee for your support of our active duty plus up. You've also supported us, of course, in our Guard and Reserve as well. The active duty will go from roughly 311,000 to 317,000 airmen by the end of this fiscal year. But in reality, I think all of these mission demands I just spoke about will indicate that we need more growth in FY17. So in order to meet that demand, I plan to take a judicious approach to incrementally increase our total force beyond the current level, provided, of course, that we can get the right talent. And we would be grateful to this committee to consider a reprogramming action at the appropriate time, should that be required. Speaking of total force, we're continuing to maximize our use of the Guard and Reserve by shifting additional missions and workload when it makes sense to do so. So examples here include cyber, ISR, command and control, mobility, and space. So we are continuing to shift workload and missions as it makes sense. We're also continuing to push the envelope when it comes to integration of our Guard and Reserve with our active, and that goes from the staff level at the highest headquarters all the way down to the wing level and to the flight line. I also want to call to your attention, still in the subject of people, that we are expanding the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Program. We're fully funding our child care operations, and we're making a big effort to fund the most important infrastructure projects to benefit our airmen, all as part of this budget. And of course, we too are looking forward to welcoming qualified women into the previously closed career fields. The second priority I mentioned is getting the balance right between readiness and modernization. And we believe strongly that we need both. We can't have either or. It's not an either or proposition for us. So as we've explained before, less than half of our combat forces are ready for what we call a high-end fight. Less than half. And when I say high-end fight, I'm speaking of a conflict that might take place in an anti-access aerial denial environment. In other words, an environment where an adversary could shoot us down, interfere with us in some major way in space or cyberspace. In addition to all of this, our aircraft inventory is the oldest that it has ever been. And of course, as you know, the adversaries are closing the technological gap on us, so we must modernize. In terms of readiness, this budget funds flying hours to their maximum executable level, invests in weapon system sustainment, and ensures combat exercises like red and green flag remain strong. After consulting with our combatant commanders, General Welsh and I agreed that we needed to make some adjustments in this budget to address these real-world changes that I mentioned. One of those adjustments is we are rephasing the A-10 and the Compass Call retirements. And bottom line here is we are not proposing to retire any of these aircraft in FY17. Furthermore, we'll continue to look at the mix of aircraft each year, and we'll be prepared to modify based on the global security situation. We also need to ensure the right number and mix of unmanned aircraft, so we are going to invest more in additional Reapers, and we also need to invest more in munitions. Again, this is contained in the budget request. Turning to modernization, this year's budget will continue the ongoing investments to support our top priorities of nuclear deterrence, space, and cyberspace. We're also continuing with the F-35, the KC-46, combat rescue helicopter, JSTARS we're going to get started on, as well as TX. We also are going to continue to move forward with the B-21, which is formerly known as the Long Range Strike Bomber. This fifth-generation global precision attack platform will give our country a networked sensor shooter capability and propel us into the next century of air-powered dominance. Now, unfortunately, modernization is also where we had to make some of those tough choices because of the insufficient budget. So, for example, with reluctance, we are deferring the purchase of 5 F-35s in FY17 and 3 C-130Js in FY17. We'll also have to delay some of our upgrades to the fourth-generation systems like the F-16, and many infrastructure projects will simply have to wait. So infrastructure is another tough choice for us, and I want to also support our department's request for a BRAC in FY19. The third priority reflects our commitment to give the taxpayers the best bang for the buck, which is why we call it Make Every Dollar Count. And we're working a number of initiatives here, including we too are working on streamlined energy usage, cost savings ideas that come directly from airmen that we then put into practice, and we're continuing the march toward meeting the mandate to be audit ready by the end of FY17. So, Mr. Chairman, as I begin to wrap, again, I want to thank this committee and you for your leadership and support of the Bipartisan Budget Act. I want to associate myself with remarks about the need to lift sequestration. I know many on this committee have tried very hard to do that. If we return to sequestration, and if we once again have to park jets and take some of those very dire effects that we did the last time around, there's just no question in my mind. This means that we will enter possibly a future conflict less prepared. And if you're a student of history, I like history, I try to be a student. History teaches us that the consequences of insufficient preparation are prolonged conflict and increased loss of life. So please keep up the fight to lift sequestration permanently. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. That's exactly what history teaches. I hope we learn those lessons. Let me just ask about a couple things right quick. General Neller, I have asked for the statistics for the Marine Corps on Class A mishap rates. And my understanding is the average over the last 10 years was 2.15 mishaps per 100,000 flying hours. But that went up in 2014 to 2.67, 15, 2.88, 16, 3.96. So the point is, over the last 3 years especially, the number of Class A mishaps per 100,000 flying hours has been increasing significantly. Given this readiness and safety issue and the budget constraints and all that the Marine Corps is being asked to do operationally, can the Marine Corps meet the demands of the national military strategy?
Chairman, let me first comment on the aviation. We track this very closely, and the simple fact is that we don't have enough airplanes to meet the training requirements for the entire force. The force that's deployed is trained and ready, but it's a little bit different for every model type and series. So we are working on this, and not all of it's related to aviation maintenance, some of these events. But it is a fact that our mishap rate has gone up. As far as our ability to meet the national military strategy, our ability to meet the day-to-day commitments and requirements of the combatant commanders, we're doing that with trained and ready forces. Our ability to meet other regional requirements for major contingency plans, we would be able to do that, but we would probably not be able to do it within the time frame that the current plans call for us to arrive to participate in that conflict.
Okay. General Milley, the numbers for the Army are not quite as dramatic, but they are also on an upward trend, rising from 1.52 in fiscal year 14 to 1.99, just about 2 in fiscal year 16. Let me ask you the same question. Can the Army meet the demands of the national military strategy?
Thanks, Chairman. On the Class A piece, it has our attention. We've asked for the Deputy Commander of Trade Arc to conduct a multifunctional very detailed study of Class A aviation accidents. One of the things you'll see in this budget is we're increasing flying hours for our rotary wing aviators from 10 hours to 12 hours. Ideally, we want them 14 to 15 hours a month. We can't get there with the budget to 14, 15, but we're going to increase it to 12. But we're going to have more data here in probably a month or so, and we'll share that with you as soon as we get it. But it does have our concern. Our aircraft accidents have increased, and we're very concerned about it. On the second question, it's my estimate that, similar to General Neller's, is that on a day-to-day basis, the Army does about 46% of all the combatant commander demand signal that comes in, and 64% of emergent demand from the combatant command is done by the Army. We can handle that on a day-to-day basis, and we have also very good current capability and capacity to fight the counter-terrorist, counterinsurgency fight that's ongoing against ISIS and other areas such as in Afghanistan. So we've got those skill sets. My concern going forward is at the higher end in the event of a contingency, and if that were to happen, I have grave concerns in terms of the readiness of our force, the Army forces, to be able to deal with that in a timely manner. And I think the cost, both in terms of time, casualties and troops, and the ability to accomplish military objectives would be very significant, and we've all given our risk assessments associated with that in a classified session.
Let me turn to a different issue, and I want to ask first Admiral Richardson and then General Welch about this. Deputy Secretary Work has testified before this committee that nuclear weapons remain the most important mission we have. This is absolutely critical. And Secretary Carter has said it's the foundation for everything we do. I was just engaged in a conversation yesterday with some British parliamentarians about their decision whether to replenish, update their nuclear deterrent, which is submarine-based. Admiral, do you agree, I guess first, with Secretary Carter and Deputy Secretary Work that our nuclear deterrent is foundational, and do you believe that all three legs of the triad plus the weapons themselves must be part of that modernization effort for us?
Chairman, yes, I do. I think that the triad and our part of that, the Ohio Replacement Program, are absolutely critical to national survival. And that's why that program is our #1 modernization program. We're also working, as you know, very closely with the British, our partners in the United Kingdom, to make sure that they reconstitute and modernize their continuous at-sea deterrence. And so I absolutely agree. And I agree that it's a triad approach that we have right now, and that includes not only the platforms, but the weapons and the warheads. And so this moves over to not only the Defense Department, but the Department of Energy to keep that whole system whole.
A couple of those legs are in your bailiwick. Do you agree that we need all three legs of the triad to be modernized as well as the weapons themselves?
Chairman, I do believe that. I believe the triad has been very effective over time. I think nuclear deterrence has been the security wallpaper, if you will, for this country since we stood up our nuclear capability, and I think it should continue. I believe without all three legs of the triad, you expose seams in that nuclear deterrence posture to certain enemies.
Thank you. Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too am concerned about our nuclear capabilities and modernization. General Welsh, the funding bow wave for the modernization, the nuclear modernization is really steep. Is there an effective 25-year plan to find and execute all these programs concurrently to modernize?
Ma'am, I think the important thing that we have to face really as a nation is a decision on, are we going to modernize, are we going to keep the triad, the question the chairman just asked. And if the answer to that is yes, there's no option but to fund it. but we have to prioritize the funding, and if we decide we're going to take pieces of this, we have to prioritize the pieces that we'll invest in. This is a much larger discussion than any particular service. It has to be a Department of Defense. It's a congressional, it's a White House discussion, and I hope it's something that the next administration takes on early in their tenure, because we need an answer pretty quickly, or we're going to spend money toward a lot of programs that we can't complete if we don't fund them down the road.
Well, thank you for that, because, I mean, this has been my concern, is the funding of how do we modernize. As you know, I've sat, I think, of the 19 years, now 20, that I've been on this committee, all but 2 on the Strat Forces Committee, being a ranking member for it at one point. And I hear Mr. Murphy and others say that our readiness is deteriorating, or has deteriorated to some extent, and this is really not something we should in detail discuss, obviously, I believe, in a public forum, but you know, being able to move forward our domestic programs, being able to have an Army at ready to go, having an Air Force that can do the air cover and air deterioration that we need before we send in our Marines or our Special Forces or our Army, and then doing a total modernization on our nuclear capabilities. It's all, it can't all be funded at once. And so, Mr. Chairman, I hope that this committee will really sit and think about how we're going to get all of that done, because it's coming to head. I mean, we can't fund everything. We just cannot fund everything. So I hope that, Mr. Chairman, that we might consider how we really take a look at that funding issue. I have another question. This one will be for Admiral Richardson and General Milley. When Admiral Greenert and General Odierno wrote us that letter in 2014, well, wrote to the Secretary of Defense, that regional missile defense capabilities were stretched and that the Department of Defense should look, among other approaches, to deterrence and left-of-launch capabilities to relieve the demands on missile defenders and the cost to the Navy and the Army. What are the effective alternatives that are being considered to that?
Ma'am, I'll tell you that right now, in terms of the Navy situation, the ballistic missile defense ships are our most stressed force right now. So in terms of deployment lengths and that sort of thing, they come under more stress.
Can you pull that up? I can't hear you as well. Thank you.
All right. Those ships are as stressed as any in the Navy. But we are considering sort of the ballistic missile defense across the entire kill chain, if you want. You know, left of launch, starting with the systems that, you know, program and launch these missiles all the way through towards terminal defense. You take that entire sequence, you break it down, and you take a look at opportunities and vulnerabilities in that whole sequence, and that's our approach. But there is the terminal phase, which relies on our Aegis equipped cruisers right now, both at sea and ashore, and that's what, you know, it is a costly system, as you point out, and that's why General Odierno and Admiral Greenert wrote that letter, so that we can make sure we're approaching this from a systems assistance approach and not missing any opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think we've had such reliability and such capability in that area that we tend to, you know, want to use it everywhere, and I know that it is stretched. I've been with Mr. Turner to see some of the new systems coming up with respect to that, and I'm just worried again how we're going to fund all of this. And then the last question I have, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry for taking up the time, but what's the Air Force's plan to shift away from using the Russian RD-180 engine and have assured access to space as quickly as possible?
The plan that we have been pursuing, of course, in conjunction with all of you and the last 2 NDAAs, is to fund rocket propulsion systems to allow industry to get away from that Russian engine as quickly as possible. We're targeting 2019 per the law. We're doing it in a full and open, competitive way. We're working as hard as we can at it. The technical experts tell me that 2019 is an ambitious technical target, I'll say, for a timeline, but we are working as hard as we can toward that goal. We absolutely share the goal.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think I'll have some follow-up questions in particular on that issue. Thank you.
Mr. Forbes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to each of you, I wished I had the time to go through and tell the American people all the great things you've done, because you're all truly assets to our country, and we appreciate each and every one of you. My questions go more not to you personally, but to the substance of what we're asking today, because it's important that we have the facts to make the decisions we need to make. And the first question I would ask each of you to do for me is to raise your hand if you had to submit, or you submitted, the written record of remarks that you have to anyone for approval that was not under your direct command before you came here today. So we had, so General Neller, you did not, you were the only one.
Congressman, you say that one more time?
Did you have to submit your written statement to anyone not under your direct command before you submitted it to us today?
I approved the statement and sent it up, and I assume it went up here as written.
Good. Thank you all for doing that. So, Mr. Chairman, if we could just show the record that everyone had to submit their approval. I think that's wrong. We just need to hear from you directly, and I know that's not your fault. Secretary Mabus, you know the personal high regard I have for you, and I appreciate your comment that the Navy, it's important that we have a presence. Also, you have been a leader to say that ship count was a part of that presence, at least a component. You've testified that we need 308 ships in the Navy, and Admiral Richardson has told us before that he'd bet his paycheck when the force structure comes back in that will go up higher, and I would also bet Admiral Richardson's paycheck that it will go up higher. We currently have 272 ships in the Navy. We have had testimony before our committee, if we get down to 260 ships, that we cease to be a superpower and we become a regional power. Right now, if we look at some of the ships, we count 2 hospital ships, 2 high-speed ferries that are in reserve status, and we're getting ready to count 11 cruisers that would be put up. It would take 18 months to get them back in the water. If we took those ships out, we'd be down to 257 ships. But even if we didn't look at that, we have had testimony from the CBO, and the Navy now says it's pretty close, that if we stay on track now and we do everything the same way we are, and we don't add about $4 billion to the accounts, maybe as much as $6 billion over the next several years, we will be down to 237 ships. Admiral Harris has testified before our committee that he only had 62% of the subs that he needed in the Pacific Command. We know that by 2029, we'll have 41 subs, where our requirement's 48. Chinese will have twice as many. We know the Marine Corps said they need 38 amphibious ships. Some people say as many as 50, but we'll have 30. We know in 2007, the Navy was able to meet approximately 90% of the validated needs of our combatant commanders. This year, it'll meet approximately 40. We know the administration is now trying to forgo the refueling of an aircraft carrier. It's trying to disestablish a carrier air wing. It's going to cut the buy of small surface combatants from 52 to 40, try to inactivate one of the 2 TAOEs in the Pacific, deactivate half of our cruiser fleet, and deactivate 3 amphibious ships. We also know that we had, before sequestration, cuts of between $487 to $780 billion. So my question is this, Mr. Secretary. Isn't it true that unless another administration is able to do the heavy lifting and come up with that extra $4 billion to $6 billion a year, that the air will come out of this balloon and we will come down to 237 ships? And the second thing is, can you point to where this administration has presented any budget adding that $4 billion of making up that shortfall. It looks to me kind of like my wife coming to me when she's complaining about her house, and I said, but look, I got plans to buy the house on the hill, and then she says, but where are you going to get the money? So maybe you can help us with that.
Thank you, Congressman. And every CNO that I've been privileged to serve with, and I have talked about the Ohio class replacement coming in 2021 and the need to fund that to keep it from having a huge and detrimental impact on Navy shipbuilding. I would say that what your comments point out is that shipbuilding takes a long time. It's not the job of one administration. It's not the job of one Congress. And this administration has reversed that precipitous decline that you pointed out. It has also put us on the track to get to 308 ships, which is what you say we need. And I'd bet the CNO's paycheck too, that the next one will come in higher. But what we're debating now, what you're discussing now, is not what happens to the fleet now, it's what happens to the fleet in the 2020s.
But if you don't mind, I'd love for you to give us the rest of that for the record, and I didn't mean to cut you off, it's just I'm cut off. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly want to welcome our former colleague, Acting Secretary Murphy, to the panel and to the committee this morning. I know through a series of opportunities that we've had to discuss the issues before us, one of the most critical really is readiness, and I think that you've all in one way or another said that, you know, readiness really has no constituency. And so we have to be able to make that case to our constituents that this is certainly something that has affected us a great deal. And I think what people have a harder time understanding is how the anti-terrorism and counterinsurgency efforts have really impacted our overall readiness today of the forces throughout. Can you, in as quick a way as possible, speak to that, all the services? What is the most critical way in which that has made a difference and not allowed us to be at a place today that that is of less risk than it would have been otherwise?
Thanks, Congressman. For the Army, just very briefly, you know, for 15 years, we've been running back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan, and during that time, we've been fighting one typology of war against counterinsurgents or terrorists or guerrillas, and our higher-end training against conventional threats, hybrid threats, threats that involve enemy artillery, enemy air, enemy electronic warfare, et cetera. The higher-end, higher-intensity type battlefields have not been routinely practiced for 15 consecutive years. So our readiness against that type of threat has deteriorated over a decade and a half.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I'll tell you, the Navy, it's been very well known by this committee that this manifested itself in deployment lengths of 8 to 10 months during those times, which puts an incredible cost on the ship itself, but even more so on the people that man the ship. And so that part went under stress. The ability to do maintenance on those ships was severely affected by sequestration. It incurred a readiness debt that we have had difficulty pulling out or even making progress on, as the funding levels are what they are and the security environment in the world continues to put demands on the force.
I believe everybody's in a similar spot. The depth tempo hasn't reduced, even though we're doing similar things, but we're back in the Far East as we've reset the force there. So the amount of deployment goes on. The fight in ISIL continues to put stress on equipment, particularly aviation. We're in the process of resetting our equipment, and then you're trying to maintain legacy gear and at the same time modernize. Every model type series aircraft in the Marine Corps is in the middle of a reset. Either reset the legacy and or buy new. And at the same time, we recognize there's capabilities in training, as General Milley mentioned, that we have to get ready for the future, for what we think we're going to see in the future. So all those things together, they all are put stress on our readiness.
Congressman, the Air Force never came home from the first Gulf War. We've had airmen flying in air tasking order for 25 years in the Middle East. During that time, as Secretary James mentioned, we've cut 40% of our active duty force. So that lower force size combined with the increased deployment and operations tempo over the last 25 years has limited the amount of training we can do for the other missions that we're required to do in a different kind of conflict, as General Milley just stated. That's the biggest impact on us in attaining readiness over the long term.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you doing that very quickly, a little elevator speech, but that's important, I think, for us to be able to articulate as well. And if we could just go back to you, General Welsh, just the impact of the uncertainty on the budgets and what we have dealt with here, what impact does that have on the 2 million men and women who serve our country and sacrifice on our behalves?
They're very proud of who they are. They're very proud of what they do, and they're very proud of the joint and coalition team they stand beside doing it. And their families have been unbelievably dedicated to this. And this world of deployments I mentioned is what almost everybody in our services came into. And it's the way it's been the entire time they've served. So they're willing to pay the price if they think it's important, if they think the nation supports them, if they think they'll have the resources and the equipment and the training to be the best in the world at what they do. That's all they ask. Mm-hmm. If they don't believe that, they'll think about voting with their feet.
Yeah. General Nell?
I think that is a very good review of where everybody is. You know, they don't ask much. They always make it happen. We want to keep them here. We want to. But the thing that keeps them here is maybe not so much what you would call quality of life. It's having good gear, and the best quality of life I can offer to a Marine family is I'm going to bring their Marine home alive.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for being here. And we're particularly grateful to see Secretary Murphy, our former colleague. There is life after office, and I know his military background too. And so I thank all of you for your service. General Welsh, I appreciate being the son of a flying tiger. I'm also very proud to be the uncle of a current airman. And as chairman of the Emerging Threats Subcommittee of the Armed Services Committee, I'm concerned about the third offset strategy, which may be providing for present-day trade-offs for an overdue bet on the future when investments in both areas are desperately needed. In your opinion, what generation of weapon system is your priority to maintain American military technological superiority by 2020?
Chairman, the two best examples of technology that we need in the Air Force by 2020 are programs that are already in progress that the Congress has supported very well, and that's the KC-46 tanker and the F-35. The emerging threat over the next 5 to 10 years will mean that we have to have a capability to operate against an integrated air defense system, against aircraft that now have longer sensor ranges, longer weapons ranges than anything we currently have on our legacy fleet. The F-35, working with the F-22, will give us that capability. It'll also give us the capability to penetrate integrated air defense systems. So 2020, those are the pacing technologies that we are already in the process of acquiring.
And I'm grateful you mentioned the F-35. I formerly represent Beaufort Marine Corps Air Station, and I'm very grateful for the training there and what that means for our country. Admiral Richardson, I'm also grateful to be a Navy dad. And you yesterday courageously testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee that Iran had knowingly violated international law earlier this year by boarding a U.S. Navy vessel, detaining 10 sailors against their will. In addition to this outrage, it was reported just this week that Iran has seized an estimated 13,000 pages of information extracted from government laptops, GPS devices, and maps aboard the vessel. I'm deeply concerned about this violation. Would like to know what subsequent actions have been taken to rectify this brazen defiance of international law by Iran.
Sir, within the Navy, I'll speak to that part. We have conducted an investigation. That investigation is being reviewed right now. That will detail all of the sequence of events that went on in detail as that event unfolded, and we have identified a number of areas in the Navy where we can tighten up our act, improve, so that we can minimize the chance of something like this happening again.
Well, again, it's just an outrage to me to see our military personnel humiliated by what I consider to be an outlaw regime. And General Milley, my wife and I appreciate that we've had 3 sons who've served under your command. Military officials have said that the Army's FY17 budget request for facilities is less than that of the prior year. So by far, this affects the military construction budget, which in recent years has been focused on family housing projects. Could you explain what military barracks and facilities have your focus? And in particular, I'm very interested in Fort Jackson that I represent, and there are barracks that are 50 years of age.
Thanks, Congressman, and I must say that you have probably the most joint family I've ever heard in my life, and I do hope you got positive feedback from your sons who served under my command.
I just can't include the Coast Guard.
Yes, of course. Coast Guard's next.
Yeah.
So, but to answer your question, installation readiness is one of the foundational parts of overall readiness, because that's where we get our housing, quality of life, education, et cetera, but that's also where you get your ranges and all your training areas, et cetera. And that has taken a cut over several years, and frankly, our installations have degraded significantly. And I agree with General Neller, the greatest quality of life that we can take care of a soldier is to bring him back with his dog tags in one piece, whole mind, whole body, and that requires good training, equipment, leadership, et cetera. But also, when they're deployed, to ensure that their families have great quality of life so that they can focus on the task at hand, which is the military task. Specifically, with respect to, you mentioned Fort Jackson, South Carolina, there's some areas there that have been deteriorated. So there's several projects that you'll see in the 17 budget that are targeted specifically to Fort Jackson, because I'm not satisfied with the quality of the barracks that are there, and we're going to upgrade some of those, and we're pulling forward a couple of additional items that we put in the, that we were looking to put in the FIDEP in 18 or 19. We're going to bring them forward because I think the condition of some of the facilities at Jackson are unsatisfactory and don't meet Army standards.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary James and General Welsh, there has been recent criticism against the Air Force's proposed use of the Cost Plus during the early stages of the acquisition program for the new long-range strike bomber, the B-21. Can you please explain the process through which the Air Force determined that a blended cost plus fixed price approach was ideal for this program and what advantages it provides?
So, Congressman, I'll start, but then Chief, please jump in as well. When it comes to contracting, of course, I guess to state the obvious, one size does not fit all. It just depends on the circumstances. And so in the case of a cost plus, when it comes to development programs, this is what we tend to do when it is a larger program, when there are uncertainties, when there are risks involved. But in the case of the B-21, I do want to say that it is cost plus incentives. So that is to say there are incentives for the contractor to be able to meet milestones for schedule and performance, and if they don't meet those milestones according to the plan, they will lose their fee. And most of that, by the way, is backloaded in the development process, which incentivizes them to move through development as quickly as feasible and not drag it out. So overall, cost plus incentive for that development for a never-before-done airframe and an integration job, the way it is, seemed most appropriate, and the incentives are key. When it comes to the firm fixed price in production, that seemed to be a much more sensible way to do the production element. And as you know, Congresswoman, we awarded both at once. We awarded the EMD, Engineering, Manufacturing, and Development, together with the initial tranche of the actual production in a firm fixed price environment.
Thank you. Thank you. I have very little time left. Mr. Welsh, do you wish to comment on that?
Ma'am, I would just add that 70% of the cost of this program overall is firm fixed price.
Thank you. Secretary Murphy and General Milley, the Army has been working to replace the current force generation concept with the sustainable readiness concept. Is it still on track to replace the current model in FY17? Additionally, how does the Army's new model translate to the total force? Specifically, will National Guard and Reserve units be fully incorporated into this readiness model?
Short answer is yes, it's on track to be implemented, and it does include Guard and Reserve in the readiness model. In general, what we want to do is increase the operational use of the National Guard and we want to increase their training, increase the CTCs, selectively increase number of days of training per year, and then most importantly, increase National Guard deployments to Europe, Middle East, and Asia.
General Milley?
That was General.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm only a secretary.
Murphy.
Yeah, but Congresswoman Milley is absolutely right. I mean, if you look at our 1 million soldiers in our Army, the majority of them are actually in the Reserve or National Guard components. We are one team, one fight, one Army. And so when you look at Guam, for example, you know, we have the THAAD battery that's there, and they're active duty, but we are working with the National Guard there as well. But as far as on schedule, we were absolutely on schedule, and we are committed to make sure that we have one team and one total force.
Very good. All right. And I have a statement to make, not a question. Secretary Mabus and Admiral Richardson, I would like to make a brief comment regarding depot-level maintenance, including dry dock capabilities in the Western Pacific. I believe that these capabilities are sorely lacking, and the Navy is not investing enough to support a forward deployed fleet in the Western Pacific. We have these requirements, and we must make the right investments, as this is a key to readiness in our region. In particular, I have serious concerns about the Navy's assessments and will continue working to ensure that our forward deployed assets have quality and secure maintenance that American workers and equipment provide without losing weeks of presence. And with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to the panelists. I appreciate all of your service to our country. Secretary James, I really appreciate your leadership. You've been a great partner to work with on our endeavors in my subcommittee. I want to talk to you about helicopters. I know that's a subject you and I have talked about in the past, but for about 12 years now, we've had helicopters protecting our missile fields, our ICBM fields, that are not up to the mission. And as you know, recently Admiral Haney has stated that this problem cannot go on. My question to you is, what's the status on that? What are your plans to remedy Admiral Haney's concerns with making sure those helicopters are able to carry out their mission with protecting those ICBM fields?
I would expect within the next couple of weeks, our acquisition executive in the Air Force, who is currently looking at acquisition strategies, will come to a conclusion and make a recommendation. So at the moment, we're looking at sole source opportunities. We need to have the proper documentation to support if that is the way to go. We're looking at competitive opportunities. And I also, you know, Congressman, but just in case there are others that aren't following this day to day, there are those that actually protect the missile field, and then there's another part of the requirement as well. Mm-hmm. So maybe one is more urgent than the other. We're essentially working with Admiral Haney, we're working with Chairman Dunford and the other members of the team of the Joint Staff to look at the case for how urgent we need to go. I think it's urgent, you think it's urgent. I think we're a couple of weeks away, at least within the Air Force, having a way forward.
Great. I would like it if you would, by the 1st of April, if you could provide me a detailed cost estimate on what you anticipate it would cost the Air Force if you have to call the Army National Guard in to provide gap fillers for these missile wings security. I'd like to know what that would be with specificity if you could.
We'll do that.
And then moving on to launch. As you know, this is taking up a lot of your time and mine. And for those who aren't familiar with how we evolved with the EELV program, but it started in the 90s with Boeing and Lockheed. We tried to help both those two commercial enterprises be successful with launch capabilities, and that just didn't work out. So we helped them form the United Launch Alliance with a lot of expense to the government. But it's essential for national security and access to space. Could you certify, Secretary James, that there's a sufficient commercial market to support these companies over the next 10 years and sign firm fixed price contracts for the same?
I could not certify that, Chairman. I know the companies are trying to become competitive because they believe it, but I certainly could not certify such a thing.
And do you concur then with the analysis by General Mitchell's study, which stated, quote, launch capacity exceeds demand by a 3-to-1 ratio to service that in this fixed market.
I would have to go back and read that to see the context. I'm not sure he was talking about the total world market, including commercial launches, or whether he just meant NSS. So please allow me to go back and reread that passage and get back to you for the record.
Well, and you'll find he was making reference to that global market, and it's just a practical concern that we're going to have to acknowledge. I'm not sure what the answer is going to be either, but you and I are going to have to navigate these waters and figure out how to make sure we have assured access to space. And I don't know what the answer is going to be ultimately, but I would look forward to having more dialogue with you offline about this.
And Mr. Chairman, I would also bet the CNO's paycheck that we will be having more dialogue, you and me. So, but I thank you very much.
Yeah, we're determined to make sure he never gets paid again, aren't we? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I appreciate it, and I hope you all figure it out because it's a complex subject. Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses. It's great to see our former colleague. Shows there is hope after Congress, and again, it's your testimony has been outstanding this morning. So, Secretary Mabus, we've again enjoyed your long service here, longest since World War I, and I just want to follow up again with some of the exchange earlier, which I think we're all on the same team here, that shipbuilding is the long game, and that we did, as a nation, take a holiday. As you pointed out, only 41 ships under contract during the 8 years preceding your time in office. We've doubled that to 84. I see it every day in southeastern Connecticut. We have the Illinois christening, the South Dakota Keolang is coming up soon in the yard. We have the Colorado, the Vermont. There has not been 4 ships under construction in southeastern Connecticut at the same time since the 80s. And frankly, the biggest challenge we have is workforce needs. Secretary Perez is right down the hall. We just had a hearing on the Workforce Investment Act and the fact that Connecticut, like Maine, Virginia, Hawaii, California, they're all out there really now scouring the countryside for metal trades. And again, I think it's that speaks volumes about your record, and I want to thank you publicly for the time that you've spent leading our nation and really recovering our fleet. Admiral Richardson, we had a sequence of witnesses over the space of about 7 days a couple weeks ago: Admiral Stavridis, Admiral Harris, and General Breedlove. And without any prompting, Admiral Stavridis talked about how Russian submarine activity now is about 70 to 80% of where it was during the Cold War. Admiral Harris, again, just said, we need more submarines out in the Pacific. General Breedlove talked about the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, and that we're playing zone defense. We have a force structure that was developed back 10 years ago of 48 submarines in the fleet. We have 54 now that are under stress. Do we need to take another look at that force structure?
Sir, we do, and I've started that look right now. It's part of our updated force structure assessment, and that will include a comprehensive look at attack submarine force levels.
So, I mean, obviously this budget this year keeps the 2-a-year build rate for Virginia and has all the investment in Ohio replacement.
Yes, sir.
But again, even with that, we're looking at a 41 sub fleet unless we, again, tweak or move on. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, sir. So this goes to one of the points that the Secretary makes very eloquently, is that these are long-term decisions, as you highlighted. And so at the end of their lives, these ships leave service at the rate that they entered service. And we were building ships, submarines in this case, at 3 or 4 a year, and that's the rate at which they leave service. And so we have to be very thoughtful in terms of a building plan that reaches and maintains those required force levels. Our 2-per-year Virginia plan is part of that. We've done an intense look at the industrial base over the last year. We think we can mitigate that further, particularly in 21. There might be room, industrial capacity to build an additional Virginia-class submarine in that year, so that would make it 10 over the 5-year plan. So we look forward to discussing that with you. That would mitigate that trough somewhat. We're building the Virginia payload module, so we get more capability out of each of those Virginia-class submarines starting in FY19. But we do have to continually challenge ourselves to make sure that we've got the right number in terms of requirements, and we're doing everything that we can to look at meeting that requirement. And, if that comes up with a resource or a cost that has been traditionally considered unacceptable, I think we still owe you that plan at the best cost point that we can appreciate, and then we'll have a discussion.
Good. And as you know, the Sea Power Subcommittee will work with you, and I know I can speak for Mr. Forbes. I want to give you, Mr. Mabus, the floor for just again, the question is, are we going to hit 300 ship Navy with the contracts that are underway and the work that I described earlier that's happening right now?
We're going to get to 300 by 19 and to 308 by 21, just with the ships that this committee has authorized, that's been appropriated, and that are under contract today. And once again, these are long-term things. I mean, it took the fleet size we're living with today, those decisions were made 8, 10, 15 years ago. The fleet size that we will be living with in the mid-2020s, late 2020s, those decisions are being made today. This administration has built all the ships we're going to be able to build and have them under contract.
Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your service to our nation. General Neller, I want to focus on Marine Corps aviation. As you know, Lieutenant General Davis, I think, has done a very good job in trying to bring back Marine Corps aviation readiness. Can you give us a perspective? When General Paxton came and testified before our subcommittee, he said that we don't get back to restoring full-scale or full-spectrum readiness in Marine Corps aviation just by adding flying hours. Can you kind of give us a drill down on what we need to do to get you back to full-spectrum readiness on Marine Corps aviation?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. It's different for every model type series, but in general, we have to repair our legacy aircraft that we have to keep online, and we have to modernize by buying new airplanes. We're buying the F-35. The acquisition objective is 420, and we've got about 70. We're going to stand up our second squadron. At the same time, we've got F-18s that are going to fly for another 10 plus years. MV-22s, acquisition objective 360. We got about 270, 280. So that's happening. So same thing with Hueys and Coprs. CH-53 is probably in the hardest spot because we don't have we have 2 demonstrators that are flying. They're flying very well. They got over 35 hours. I saw them last week, but that program is going to take some time to go through the test and evaluation. So it's a combination. Buy new, repair our old, and the accounts for FY17. This budget fully funds the sustainment accounts for putting aircraft through depot level. And Admiral Richardson and I were out at the Fleet Readiness Center in San Diego. They have improved their output. We've opened up other venues, got 2 contractors that have provided additional aircraft. So all that's going to go on, but the bottom line is we got to get more airplanes on the ramp. Pilots have to fly more. We've got to get our maintainers the parts they need to fix the airplanes. So all these things are working. I think we have a plan. It's funded, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a couple years of this combination of effects.
Very good. Thank you, General Neller. I appreciate that. I know we're all concerned about getting to the point that we project the Marine Corps needs to be at, so we want to make sure we keep up to date on that. Admiral Richardson, I know that you've been approached about a number of submarine issues, but I want to drill down a little bit on Ohio-class replacement. The largest of the FY17 research and development programs are for Ohio-class replacement, and you've talked extensively about the design phase, making sure we're mature in design so when we go to build that boat, we are ready to go. We understand, though, that if we take the cost of that boat wherever it ends up, and we put that in the middle of a shipbuilding budget, we know what happens. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. What we, I believe, need to be looking at is what do we do to mitigate that? And what we have done as a House and trying to get the Senate to do is a National Sea-Based Deterrence Fund, which is how we funded Ohio-class submarines originally. Can you give us a perspective? What kind of cost savings will we be able to accrue by funding Ohio-class replacement with the National Sea-Based Deterrence Fund? Because there's still some resistance here. I think that that's the way to do it, and it doesn't interfere with other long-term viability of other shipbuilding programs.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. First of all, I like what the fund stands for, which is that this is a national program of absolutely top priority for national security. And so it elevates the discussion to a national level, which is exactly where I think it should be. With the authorities that the fund may provide, which would allow you to make very wise business decisions, the projections are that you could save on the order of 10 or more % across the program, which is essentially getting one submarine for the cost of, free.
Right, yeah,
right.
For the total cost.
Yeah. So significant savings achievable by the use of a fund like that.
Gotcha. General Neller, from your perspective, we look at all the shipbuilding programs. Obvious the ones we're addressing are Ohio-class replacement, but also amphibious lift. One of the elements is to look at, what we're doing with the next generation amphibious ships, the LXR. Give us your perspective on the importance of the timeliness of getting that program locked in as far as building those ships.
Congressman, it's similar to what the CNO said about submarines. We build these ships, they have a certain life expectancy, so if you don't have a replacement vessel, they have to have an extension program, or their maintenance costs are increased, so you're spending money to keep something older online. So right now, due to the support of the Congress and this committee, we're going to get LPD 28, give us 12 LPD 17 class ships, and the next class of ship is the LXR to replace the landing ship dock, the Whidbey Island Harpers Ferry class. The first ship of that class is supposed to be built in 20. There's some advanced procurement of long lead items like engineering, power, engines, and steel. But there's a gap, and as anytime you have a gap, the workforce is not able to work. You forget what you've learned, and your costs go up. So there was a discussion about it of LPD repeat. Can't make the price because we're all concerned with the cost. So there's a ship design, and talking with the CNO and the Secretary and Mr. Stackley, the plan is that we'll come up with a design. It's going to be bid between a couple of different shipyards, and we'll start to build that first ship in 20. If there were more money and we could come up with a design faster, that all could possibly be moved to the left. But then ideally, whenever we do start to build that ship, there should be not build a ship, stop, build a ship, stop. It should be build a ship, start the next one, so that workforce gets smarter. That we know will drive the cost down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, lady and gentlemen, for your service to the nation. There can be no greater honor for me as a congressman than to serve on the House Armed Services Committee that is charged with the responsibility of authorizing expenditures for the national security of this country, which is guaranteed by our men and women who serve us in the military, and you all lead that effort, and I thank you for that. I will say that since 2011, you've been operating under sequestration, and each one of you have talked about how this has eroded your ability to ensure the continued superiority of the United States military. And we've heard a lot about the impact on ships and planes. We know that the Air Force and the Navy and the Marines are very important elements of our superiority. But we should not forget about the foundational element of boots on the ground Army. And so I want to ask about how sequestration, which is not a program of President Obama, it's actually a statutory law passed here in Congress. I think members of the Armed Services Committee were not smitten with it at all because we knew what impact it would have across the board, 10% cuts. Without regard to need or jeopardy that we would place the nation in. But I want to talk about that in terms of the Army and how the end strength of the Army has shrunk due to sequestration. Mr. Murphy and General Milley, would you address that, please?
Congressman, off the bat, budgets are moral documents. It shows what our country's priorities are. You know, I left the Congress 5 years ago, and the budget for the Army at that time was $243 billion. You heard my opening testimony, we're asking for $125.1 billion. So we have downsized our Army. I would like to recognize, though, I was thankful also for the BBA of 15, which helped relieve that sequestration. We are very thankful for that predictable and adequate funding. But if you're asking me as far as what this budget request is, it is minimal. It's minimally adequate. We are taking high risk as an Army and as a nation when you fund our Army at this level, especially when you consider the up-tempo and the world right now, when you talk about ISIS, a resurgent Russia, aggression with North Korea. So we ask you to support our budget request at that level, but I would like to, when you look at the brigade combat teams, again, we are a total Army, but as far as 5 years ago, when I left the Congress, we had 45 brigade combat teams on active duty. Now we have 31.
Well, in addition to the diminution on end strength, we also have issues of readiness and modernization. General Milley, could you comment on that?
Yeah, thanks, Congressman. As I mentioned earlier, the readiness issue is our #1 priority as we go forward, because we are uncertain, and I can't tell you or anyone else that our nation won't be in other conflicts next week, next month, next year, or the year after that. None of us at this table can do that. So we've always got to maintain readiness, and readiness is the #1 priority. Right now, the readiness of the United States Army, all components of the United States Army, is not at a level that is appropriate for what the American people would expect to defend them. And I'll be happy to give a classified briefing on the exact specifics of that, but it's not at the levels that can execute satisfactorily in terms of cost, in terms of time, cost in terms of casualties, or cost in terms of military objectives. As far as the impact specifically on the Army of the diminution of funding, et cetera, the Army is the largest force, largest military force among all the joint forces. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, we do 46% of the annual demand of the combatant commanders, and 64% of everything they ask for on an emergent basis comes out of the Army. And we've suffered something like 60 or 70% of all the casualties over the last 15 years. And we've been cut significantly. So you can imagine that there's a significant amount of stress on the force as a result, and that also impacts readiness. So you got the largest force, the largest demand, the largest stress, and the least budget. All of that is cumulative on the United States Army. We'll drive on. The caissons will go rolling along. We'll execute the tasks that are given to us on a day-to-day basis, but it does come with risk. And people have got to be clear-eyed and open-minded about what that risk is. And again, I'll be happy to talk in a classified session in more detail on the risk if you desire.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Franks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As always, the generals and admirals and all the service people there, we express great gratitude to you all for everything that you do. General Milley, I've been especially impressed with the cogency and clarity of your comments in recent days, and I appreciate you speaking so clearly to us, because I believe your perspective is critically important. With that, I'm going to direct my questions to the civilian command structure here. Secretary James and Secretary Mabus, during its 7-year tenure, the Obama administration, I understand, has reviewed and reassessed the need for the nuclear triad. Has the administration conducted detailed analysis of eliminating one or more legs of the triad or significantly altering the U.S. Nuclear posture? And if so, what were the results of those efforts? And I'll start with you, Secretary Mabus.
Congressman, I'm not aware of any detailed look at that. We have been obviously focused on our leg of the triad, the Ohio-class replacement, and have obviously done very detailed analysis of how that program comes into being, and it's on track for 2021.
Well, let me kind of reorient the question. Why has the administration continued to propose such strong support for and recapitalization of the nuclear triad from your perspective?
Well, to quote the CNO, it's a matter of our national existence. And from a Navy standpoint, It's our top modernization program. It's a top program that we have. It's on track to begin construction of the Ohio-class replacement 2021. That's when we have to begin. But as this CNO and the three that I've been privileged to serve with have said, and I've said, you're going to have to look at this program with a national lens, because if you drop this into the middle of a Navy shipbuilding budget, it will just gut Navy shipbuilding for decades to come. And so the reason that we're focused on it is because it is an existential program. Yeah. And the reason that we're focused on how to do it is to do it without damaging our conventional superiority as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir. Secretary James, I might ask you share the same endorsement and support for the nuclear triad.
Yes, I absolutely support it, and I believe that the administration supports it precisely because it has worked for us for decades. It has provided that deterrent, and each leg of the triad is a little bit different aspect to that. So the ICBMs are considered responsive. The sea-launched are considered survivable, and the bombers, of course, are flexible, and they also are survivable because of the dispersion. If I could just add one point, obviously it is a certain amount of money, and to the extent we fund one thing, if we're under budget constraints, we can't fund another. So I would just like to say I am not fully familiar with the Strategic Deterrence Fund that you all have referenced here, but if that is a Strategic Deterrence Fund which would help or benefit one leg of the triad, I would ask for consideration that all the legs of the triad be included in such an approach.
Well, Secretary Carter and Deputy Secretary Work have made clear that the nuclear deterrence is the Department of Defense's highest priority mission, and certainly I agree with that. But for the Navy and the Air Force, how are you prioritizing your portions of the nuclear deterrence mission within each service, and what nuclear deterrence programs are you pursuing, and where do they rank in your service's priority list? You kind of have to take a overview, each of you, if you would, of those points.
It's our top priority. We've said that for several years now. It's funded. The first boat is funded. We've funded all the research and development, all the design work, all the engineering work going into this. As was said in answer to an earlier question, we've been working with our colleagues, the British, on a common missile launch tube, so that we do save some money there. We've been driving down the cost of these boats, and we're on track to begin construction of the first one in 2021, which will allow it to take its place in the fleet and in the rotation at the correct time when the Ohio class begins to retire.
And Mr. Franks, I would say there's three parts. There's the people who perform the nuclear mission, there's the readiness of those people, and then there's the modernization aspects. And over the last several years, we have shifted billions of dollars in additional people to try to address all of these areas. So when it comes to modernization, of course, we have the B-21. We talked about that somewhat earlier. We have the ground-based strategic deterrent, which would be the future of the ICBM force. And then we, of course, have to also fund appropriately the weapons that would go with these.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you.
Mr. Rourke. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to thank each of you for your testimony today and your service to the country. And I would like to ask Secretary Murphy and General Milley a series of questions on readiness based on some of what we've heard so far today. Secretary Murphy, you defined readiness as the components being a fully manned and fully trained force that we send into harm's way. And General Milley has been very eloquent about the consequences of a failure to do so. It really will end up costing this country the lives of the service members who are there fulfilling our missions. If the publicly stated goal for the Army is to be at 90% readiness, and if we are in this setting somewhere short of that, what does it cost to get us to our stated goal if it's not in this President's budget?
Well, Congressman, a couple things. As far as when you look at the budget, as I mentioned, it's minimally adequate. and we're taking on high risk. If you're talking about end strength, that's also, we are at the minimal levels. We are on a glide path, as you know, to go down to 980,000 on the total force Army. If you do give the Army money and extra money, it doesn't mean that we're going to be at 90% the next day. Readiness takes time to build, and that's why we are expanding CTCs, the combat training centers, and that's a total force. So next year, we have planned that we're going to double the National Guard units, brigade combat teams, going through the CTCs. So it's multi-level, so it's not just, the money is critically important. If you give us the money, we will be more ready, we will give the training, and as you know, we train like we fight.
You really got my attention earlier when you said you put us at high risk when you fund the Army at this level, which leads me to this conclusion. I don't want to be a passive witness to high risk. And so if more money is needed to improve readiness and reduce risk, especially for the service members whom we want to return safely, then I want to fund that. I want to be an advocate for that funding, and I want to be able to convince my colleagues that that funding is necessary because it comes at a cost in tax dollars, other opportunities, and other priorities. So I want to know what that number is. I don't simply want to assume that we must move forward with a high-risk posture for the U.S. Army. So looking for a specific number that I can advocate for.
Real quick, we have obviously our base budget request at $125.1 billion. We have an unfunded request, which is not part of the, please fund the base. Then we have unfunded, it's called UFERS, as you know, at $7.5 billion, which helps mitigate that risk. But again, that doesn't mean that we're at 90% the next day. I mean, this is a process. And I believe the chief wants to comment as well.
Yeah, Congressman, on the whole issue of readiness, the very first question any of us needs to ask is readiness for what? As I mentioned earlier, the United States Army, you can take it to the bank right now, is ready to fight ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and any other terrorist group, counterinsurgency type thing. That's not what we're talking about when we're saying risk. We're talking about great power war with one of or two of four countries. You're talking about China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. That's the guidance we were given. That's how we're force sizing the budget, or that's how we're force sizing the force, and that's how we planned the budget, in accordance with the National Military Strategy, the Defense Planning Guidance, and a wide variety of other documents. To do those operations against those countries, if that day would ever come, that's what we're talking about in terms of the level of risk. Now, we collectively can roll the dice and say those days will never come, and that's a course of action. That is not a course of action I would advise, and I think that the guidance is correct. We need to size the force and train the force, all the forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, not just the Army, to be able to handle those contingencies. And I think there's a high level of risk associated with those contingencies right now.
So let me ask this.
Yeah.
If others before us have said we're at the low, ragged edge of what is safe or manageable risk, if you say we're at high risk, does $148 million total base and OCO for the U.S. Army get you to where you need to be, or do you need something more to mitigate that risk? I'm accountable for this, so I want to make sure that I'm advocating for and we're legislating for the appropriate number to get you to where you need to be based on risk as you see it. I am out of time, so I hope that someone will follow up on this question because I want to know what that number is.
Congressman, it's a minimal level.
I yield back.
Great questions. Mr. Turner. Thank you. I want to thank each and every one of you for the fact that you have, with clarity, assisted us in the debate on the issue of sequestration. And following on with the previous questioner, we appreciate an understanding that the base budget number that you need is 574, and we're certainly working and struggling to get it to that level. It's unfortunate that the administration did not follow the budget deal that had been agreed to with the House and the Senate, and did not send over a budget that was consistent with the 2-year predictable funding that Secretary Murphy had indicated was helpful. The base budget sent by the administration is lower, and I know you were all forced to present us budgets that were for that lower number. We're certainly hoping to restore some of those to get back to what would give you some consistency in the funding that you expected from last year. General Milley, You had said that the issue of risk and it being unacceptable with respect to readiness equated to increased time and casualties. Secretary James, the General gave a great description for the Army. Are we currently at an unacceptable risk with the Air Force with respect to readiness, and does that risk also equate to increased time and casualties?
Congressman, could I make just a quick clarification? I did not use the word unacceptable. It's not my choice to say whether the risk is acceptable or not acceptable. It's my military professional advice tells the decision makers, Congress, the President, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Army, what I think the risk is. It is the decision maker's choice to determine whether it's acceptable or unacceptable.
I appreciate that you've said that. So let's go to you then, General. Help me with how to characterize that risk, because obviously as we attempt to advocate to put the base budget at 574, sure. I believe, and I think many believe it's unacceptable. How would you characterize the risk then currently?
The risk in terms of time, troops, and tasks, and that's how we categorize it. It's military risk. Can you do the military tasks expected of you in the various contingency operations? Yes or no, and if you can't do all of them, what ones can you do? And that translates into a level of risk. Second is the effect on time. Can you do those tasks and you can get them done on time in accordance with what is determined by the decision makers to be an acceptable amount of time for the American people to accept in the course of a conflict?
General, I understand that balance, and you've been very good in giving us it, but where are we in that balance?
Troops is casualties. I have said that that level of risk is high risk for the contingencies that are the higher end contingencies, not for our day-to-day.
I understand.
But for the higher end contingencies, we are, in my view, my professional view, at a high risk to execute the tasks that would be required. That's correct.
Excellent, perfect. So using the general terms for those high contingencies, is the Air Force at the same place the Army is?
So half of our combat air forces are not sufficiently ready for that kind of a high-end fight that General Milley just described against one of those great powers. Ready to do what? That's an excellent question. We, too, are ready, and we've been doing it for 25 years to fly and operate in the kinds of environments that you're currently seeing in the Middle East. It takes a toll, but we're ready. We are doing it. I also want to agree with the point about time as a factor here. So money is helpful for readiness, but freeing up the time of our people to go and do this training is equally important. And right now we are stretched so thin and we're so small as an Air Force and we're so deployed, we're having difficulty getting the time freed up. So yes, I am very worried about it, and yes, if you go into a high-end conflict against a great power and you're not sufficiently ready, history teaches me you lose more lives and it's a prolonged conflict, and it's very worrisome.
General, to get back to you, you had talked about rolling the dice and maybe the day will never come, in looking at that calculus, don't our adversaries know it too? So if we decide to just underfund, assuming the day will never come, don't we lessen our effects of deterrence and thereby perhaps even increase our risk?
I believe that is true historically, and I believe it's true in the present and likely to be true in the future, that if you are strong, that aids or increases your probability of deterring an aggressor.
General, going back to Russia then, considering that it very well could be our #1 threat, are we ready currently for a direct military conflict? If Russia continues its adventuresomeness in Ukraine and the extreme exercises that they've had in both scale and scope with respect to the Baltics, are we ready?
I think you have to look at that at 3 levels, Congressman, tactically, operationally, and strategically. At the strategic level, there's no doubt in my mind that the United States would prevail, and it would be catastrophic for an awful lot of people, but the United States would prevail. Tactically, however, you're talking about a different ballgame here.
And strategic being nuclear?
Well, I'm talking sub-nuclear. No, I'm not talking about a nuclear exchange. That would be, to me, that's beyond the beyond. But my point is, I don't think we ever want to get that question asked or answered. What we want to do, I believe, is to deter further Russian aggression in Europe. And they have been aggressive since at least 2008 or so. So I think the key is to deter Russian aggression and usher allies. And you do that with strong capabilities, some of which are military, some of which are diplomatic or informational or economic. There's a whole suite of toolbox that we can use. But
And thank you for your clarification on strategic, because many people will would translate.
Yeah,
this.
no,
I appreciate that you
that's not
walked
what I
that
was
back.
talking
Thank you.
about. No, not at all.
Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank my colleagues here and certainly the witnesses for focusing on what we just discussed here. What is strategic? And Mike laid that out. And General Milley, your answer of strategic is something that we need to be very, very aware of. Normally when we talk strategic, we talk nuclear, but you said something different, and I think that we need to understand that. Specifically, question Secretary James, what's the cost of a single F-35?
I think the current unit, 105.
How much?
105 million is the current unit
105
cost.
And you're delaying how many F-35s, which you earlier said were essential for your mission?
In FY17, 5.
How many?
5 in FY17. With the greatest of reluctance, it's the
Some
budget.
600, 700 million, something like that.
That sounds about right.
And General Milley, to address your question of risk, how much money?
We've submitted a UFR through the Department of Defense that would mitigate the risk. Again, it goes back to what is the task. The tasks that were given to us.
No, I'm not talking about, we're talking about that strategic, your discussion of strategic.
That's what I'm talking about. So the tasks that were given to us is be prepared to deter, fight, and win. I actually need to go into, I would have to really talk to you on a classified basis to tell you the exact tasks that were given to the Army or any of us, because it's a classified document, it's defense planning guidance.
Is the dollar also classified?
No, the dollar's not.
And that number is?
Well, that number would vary. Again, it goes back to what tasks are you willing to accept risk on?
Let's just say Europe.
I think that the European tasks that we're covering with the ERI in this budget of $3-point-something billion, I think will go a long way towards deterring Russia and assuring allies. And we would ask for your support of that ERI. Should more be done? Yes, I think more should be done.
And the cost of that much more?
Well, again, Congressman, that will depend on the task. I'm not trying to be cagey.
No, I understand.
It depends on the specified task, and there's a menu of options. If we threw more money at it, we could put, ERI, we could put more equipment, do
I'm
more
going to
rotations,
move
do
on.
more
Thank you. I get a sense of additional money reducing the risk.
That's right.
General Neller, you talked about your needs. You've got needs that are not being addressed. Where I'm going here is to this nuclear issue. We're going to spend $3.3 billion on every single one of the nuclear weapons. That is the bomb and related services to it. And they're going to be spending somewhere around, $113 million preparing for the Minuteman IV, the next missile. And there's been discussion back and forth around this table about priorities. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, are we prepared to set all of you on a mission of spending close to $1 trillion over the next 25 years or so on revamping, rebuilding our entire nuclear arsenal and delivery systems? We're going to make that choice now, and some of you said it's the next president's choice. No, it's our choice today because we set you on a path to do that. And the question is, what are the real important things that we need to do? Do we really need to replace the Minuteman IIIs with Minuteman IVs in the next 20, 25 years? Do we need to do that? Do we really need to have a new long-range cruise missile? Or can we delay that and instead spend the money on ramping up the Army?
May I take a shot at that from an Army perspective just briefly? I just want to be clear. I don't have a part of the triad in the sense, but I can tell you that in my view, my professional military view, and I am a member of the JCS, that the nuclear triad has kept the peace since nuclear weapons were introduced and has sustained the test of time. That's not unimportant. And that system has deteriorated, Congressman, and it needs to be revamped. It's not even an Army system. It needs to be overhauled and brought back up to its
We're not debating
level of
that it
readiness.
needs to be revamped. The question is how much and when.
Okay.
And as we make that choice, right now the choice is to do it now and get on with it and to spend an extraordinary amount of money, which will come out of every other program, not just the military, but every other program. So there's some hard choices that need to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, our choice is to do it all. I yield back.
Time gentleman's expired. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen and lady, thank you for being here today. Mr. Murphy, it's great to see you. Mr. Rooney says hi, by the way. Great to see you. The last time I saw you, we debated Don't Ask, Don't Tell on the floor, I think. It was a long time ago.
That's true.
It was great to see you. And let me just tell you, it fills my heart with joy that no matter what administration we have, whether it goes back and forth, to see the uniform leaders in front of me right now that we have today, it just makes me happy. It's a very reassuring feeling to see all of you here. The cream has risen to the top, and we're glad you're in charge. General Milley, I'd like to just say, I want to go through a few things that I've worked on over the last couple of years with the Army. You had Will Swinton, who ended up getting the Medal of Honor. His nomination got lost. My office found it. It wasn't lost. It was mishandled. CID agents even went through his trash at his house, but he got the MOH, and the Army did the right thing in the end. Major Matt Goldstein, he killed a bomb maker who killed several Marines. The Army wanted to put him in jail for about 20 years. Went to a board of inquiry. The violation could not be substantiated. His case was handled okay. Secretary McHugh revoked his Distinguished Service Cross over something that he did that was unrelated. The Army kind of did the right thing there. Lieutenant Colonel Jason Ammerine, that's the Army. The Army investigated him for talking to me about hostage recovery, but because of Jason, we were able to change the hostage policy for the country. This committee and this Congress and the President then followed suit. We changed hostage policy, and this committee benefited from his contribution to the Bergdahl report. Earl Plumley, he was nominated. He was a soldier nominated for the Medal of Honor in Afghanistan, supported by you and General Dunford. Both of you signed down on it. The Army downgraded him to a Silver Star, not even a Distinguished Service Cross. That case is now with the IG. Charles Martland roughed up a child rapist, and the Army tried to expel him. He's now been extended 3 times. And let me just tell you, he was rated number 2 out of 400 SF instructors. He's before a board now. We're hoping the Army will do the right thing. These are not just personnel cases to me. What they represent are systemic issues that have huge policy ramifications stemming out of each one of these issues. Each one exposed a certain unique problem. We try to fix the problems by first fixing the personnel cases themselves, and then trying to make a systemic change and do our oversight role here in Congress. For the most part, the Army does the right thing, but it does it kicking and screaming sometimes. You are restoring my faith in what the Army should be. Your predecessor, the previous secretary, never came to my office, never called, wouldn't answer my phone calls, nothing. So everything that we did, it wasn't a nice conversation with the Army or actually trying to fix the problem. We had to bludgeon the Army with media and going and doing as much as we can to make them react to stuff that they should have reacted to simply with a phone call to me, and we could have worked these things out. You personally are restoring my faith and confidence in the Army. My dad was in the Army, 173rd. My little brother was in the 4th Stryker Brigade. I forgive them for joining the wrong service. I think you're the right leader for today's Army. And I want to just keep engaging with you because I know you're going to put the warfighter first. And in the end, your dad's a United States Marine, so you can't be that bad. And I just want to say thank you. Thanks for doing what you're doing.
Thanks, Congressman. I appreciate that. And I am very proud to be part of a joint team. My mother was in the Navy as well, and brothers and cousins in the Air Force. So like one of the other congressmen, it's a joint family. So it's a great team, and all the services, every one of them are really doing a great job. So I appreciate your confidence. Thank you.
Mr. Ashford.
Thank you, Mr.
Chairman, just briefly, I'm from Omaha, and obviously Offutt Air Force Base is in our district, and I go way back. My father actually flew a B-26 bomber that was, we've talked about this, it was manufactured at the Martin Bomber Plant. Martin Bomber Plant's still there, and hopefully it'll remain for a couple more years anyway. I was very impressed by so much that's going on there. The sexual assault project at Offutt is an immense success. And your comment on that is absolutely correct. I mean, they have a mentoring project, a mediation project. The young airmen who are involved in that project are making a significant difference. Specifically on the 55th and all other ISR wings, the mission has changed dramatically in the last, as has been mentioned by everyone here. How do you see on the budget side? I know there are, I think, 11 or 12 planes that are deployed at any given time, at least on the 55th, and many of them are at Offutt being maintained. Do we have adequate platforms, and how do you see the ISR function being maintained and sustained under this budget and going forward, Madam Secretary?
So I'll begin, if I may, and then I'm sure the Chief will jump in. There is a lot going on in the world of ISR, to state the obvious. It's the #1 desire of the combatant commanders. If you would go to any of them and say, what more of the Air Force do you want? It's ISR, ISR, ISR. So we are adding some additional platforms, as I mentioned, some additional MQ-9s. But even more importantly, let me come back to the people. So there's a lot going on to try to alleviate some of the stresses, to build up that force, everything from we're looking at standing up some new units so that there's additional places to rotate to, other quality of life oriented areas, additional compensation, if you will, to recognize the special types of duties. So there is a lot going on, and we do need to build up that force some more.
General?
So I'd just add that the focus for us over the last 7 to 8 years has been a different part of the ISR enterprise than the part that lives at Offutt Air Force Base. The big wing ISR platforms have not been where we've invested most of our time, energy, and money over the last 8 to 9 years. That's been in the medium altitude unmanned fleet primarily because of the demand to support combat and contingency activity over that time period. We have got to get back at looking at what is a theater's worth of ISR look like to a joint force commander in a bigger, broader theater that's not involved in just a low-intensity conflict or a counterterrorism fight. And to do that, when we do that, I think we'll find that we're going to have to also follow up on recapitalization, modernization over time of the capabilities of the 55th Wing because they're invaluable, and they contribute at the national level to decision-making.
Right, and I realize the challenges on the infrastructure side, and I appreciate the attention being paid to that as well. General Milley, could I just ask just one question here? I was been very impressed by your testimony and your candor and your discussion about what happens after ISIS is destroyed. How do you see that from a financial, budgetary perspective as we move forward after the destruction of ISIS and related affiliates?
Well, I mean, it's obviously too early to tell. The strategic task or the operational task given to us by the President is to destroy ISIS. I am 110% confident that we will do that over time, and we've made adjustments to the current campaign plan, and I think over time that'll be effective. What comes next, though, what happens after ISIS is destroyed, I think that is yet to be decided. I think there's going to have to be a strategic choice. That if we're successful and ISIS is destroyed, something will have to go into that space in order to stabilize that terrain for a period of time, the terrain and the population. Ideally, that would be an international capability of some sort led by Sunni Arabs. But we're ways away from that, and I think that the planning and the thought and the analysis will have to go into that. How much will that cost? I don't know. I haven't seen any cost estimates, but I would imagine that wouldn't be cheap.
Thank you, General. I'd yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Welsh, I'm encouraged by the Air Force's plans to move forward on recapitalization of the weapons storage facilities, and was disappointed that despite the Schlesinger report that the previous facilities were decertified, but I'm glad we're back on track. So would you comment on the weapons storage facility recapitalization programs in terms of timeline and what we can expect for the near future?
We have over this next year roughly $40 million in our budget in 17 to move forward with that effort. It's almost $700 million over the FIDA. As you know, F.E. Warren is being done right now. The weapons storage facility is being renovated. The next step is Barksdale, and that would begin in 18. Beyond Barksdale, then I think the order after that would be Malmstrom and then Whiteman. And so that we're on track. It's funded. The plans are in place, and we think the design work that we've done so far in F.E. Warren has been very well done. It'll provide us a standard footprint that we can then modify as appropriate for each wing, and that contract should be let this year.
Okay, great news. Okay, General Milley, I certainly want to endorse your comments you made a few weeks ago about the Army not planning to cut one more infantry brigade. We feel like we're already below where we should be on this. I'm very interested to learn about the Army's repatching initiative. I understand that this will not impact active duty forces structure within the 310 Brigade at Fort Polk, and would like to know more about this concept of repatching. I've not heard of that before. Okay. So if you could comment and expand on that.
Yeah, repatching is probably a misnomer if that's what people have mentioned to you. So what we're looking at is really associated units. We took a page out of the Air Force. So associated units between the National Guard and the active component of the regular Army. Years ago, there was a concept called roundout. It's very similar to that. It's not exactly the same. And I want it to go both ways in the sense of National Guard units are affiliated or associated with regular Army divisions or brigades, and they're essentially rounding out that force structure. And then it can go the other way as well. Specifically with 310, we're looking at putting 310. I think we said for them Texas. Texas. I might be wrong on the division, but
I believe it is Texas.
To make them part of the 36th Division.
Yes.
And that was an option. It has not yet been decided, by the way. These are options that are coming forward after, and we're going to do rigorous analysis and study that is ongoing with the Army staff, and ultimately the Secretary of the Army will be the guy making the decision. But the idea is to associate National Guard with active duty component units, and we think that will overall increase the readiness of both components. So that's the idea behind it.
Right. You don't anticipate any change in manpower at Fort Polk? My understanding is
no. It would.
While these active duty members would be, in essence, assigned to the National Guard in Texas, they would remain stationed at Fort Polk.
They'd be regular Army active duty soldiers. They would remain at their base station. There would be no budgetary implications in terms of 12304 funds or mobilization fund or any of that kind of stuff. This is an association of active and reserve and National Guard units where they would train together, officer professional development classes, NCOPD. They'd do FTXs together. They'd go on deployments together, and so on and so forth. What we're trying to do is integrate the force to put teeth behind the idea of total force, to make that real, to walk the walk, not just talk the talk sort of thing.
Right. Okay, that's great. Well, and I'll just say in closing, I just want to thank all of the chiefs and secretaries for being here today and the great service you provide to our nation. Thank you, and I yield back, Chairman.
Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thanks to all of you for your service and your leadership. General Milley and Secretary Murphy, I just want to say as a soldier in the National Guard, I appreciate very much your leadership and the role that you have taken in highlighting the importance of this total integrated force that you've just talked about, and actually backing it up with plans and actions and training that you've just laid out. I think capitalizing on the resource and assets that we have within our National Guard and Reserve components is critical. They've often been underutilized, and largely many of the challenges have come from really a problem with the culture in providing that wide gap between the active component versus the reserve components. So I just want you to know that the leadership you've taken on this has already trickled down to the unit level that I have seen and heard when I go to my drill training on the weekend, and provided a very serious morale boost where people feel like they are actually being utilized for what they have been trained to do. I want to touch a little bit on the end strength, this 980 number, and I think a lot of us have come at this from different directions. I think it highlights the concern that many of us have on what that number means and where we need to be. I think the Commission on Future of the Army talked about, quote, this number being a, quote, minimally sufficient force. Secretary Murphy, you used the words, I think, minimally acceptable force that has created a situation of high risk. Considering the both unconventional and conventional threats that we have, whether you're ranging from groups like ISIS to North Korea, what is that end strength number that would be sufficient to be able to confront these threats on at least two fronts?
Well, Congressman, first, thanks for being part of the Army team and your service as well. You know, we are obviously planning at that 980 level where we're still drawing down and still we have a little bit to go there. But, you know, we've been very clear, it's not just the end strength numbers. I mean, Congress could pass a bill that gives us higher end strength, but if it doesn't come with funding, that will very much hurt our Army, because then you have to cut from, we've already cut from modernization. And as you said in my, as I said in my opening testimony, we're mortgaging future readiness. We're mortgaging modernization to focus on current readiness with the op tempo that we are under right now. So, you know, I can't give you an exact number. That's, you know, that's for policymakers and the president to put forth. But unless that end strength number comes with dollars behind it, it will hollow out our Army. It would not be a wise decision.
Thank you.
And I would echo that, Congresswoman. This budget, this President's FY17 budget, takes us to 460 in the active component in the regular Army by the end of the year, and it takes the Guard to 335 and the Reserve to 195. Is that sufficient? Again, it's readiness, our capability to do what? Yes, we can do the national military strategy on a day-to-day basis, but can you do the tasks that are embedded within the other documents that are classified? And the answer to that is yes, but at high risk. Okay, so then your question is, how do you lower that risk? End strength is one of the variables. Readiness is another one. Technology is another. Time, and there's a whole assortment of that. But end strength is just one. So I caution everyone about getting fixed on a fixed number, an end strength, 1 million, 500,000, 2 million, or whatever the number is. That can lead you to a bad solution. And I'd be concerned as the Chief of Staff of the Army if someone put into law that the Army will be at number X, but no money came with it for readiness or modernization. That would actually hurt, not help. Yeah. If someone wanted to increase the end strength of the Army, I'm all for it. I think it's a good thing. I think it's necessary. But it would need to come with the additional monies for readiness and modernization. Otherwise, it would end up actually hurting.
Thank you. I think that is a critical point as we go through this. Oftentimes people are throwing around different numbers without really explaining what the rationale behind that number would mean and what the cost would be. Got just a few seconds left. I just want to highlight a concern about the reduction in National Guard MILCON funding. As you well know, over half National Guard readiness centers were built between the end of World War II and Vietnam. Places like the Pohakaloa Training Center in Hawaii host not only our active and reserve components, but also foreign military officers for RIMPAC. It was built during the Korean War and is really in despicable shape. And just as we work through this, I ask you to place that at a high level of priority with regards to readiness. Thank you.
Mr. Gibson.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the panelists. Let me follow up on that question from Ms. Gabbard and also earlier from Beto O'Rourke. Build on some of the testimony earlier today, but perhaps come from a different perspective or a different angle, because I'm interested in the best military judgment from General Milley and General Neller. Many of us here listening very carefully, building the record, having testimonials about the risk, and even today, we're hearing today, the very high risk associated to where we are. and I understand there's a bit of a dance that has to go on politically. I get that. But I want to cut through some of that with this assumption that, you know, a number of us here in a bipartisan way are building a bill that stops the drawdown of the land forces. And when you consider the fact that by 2018, we're talking about taking our land forces to pre-World War II levels, I think it's important the American people hear directly about where we're heading. And so now with this bill, of course, and I heard the Chief of Staff Army mention just moments ago, and I concur with him completely, that this would have to come with the money necessary for readiness and modernization, and say the same, and I met with General Neller about a week or two ago. But I'm coming at it differently, saying it this way. If the Congress was able to build the coalition to vote for and to pass stopping the drawdown, it would essentially, to bring with it the monies necessary so we don't hollow out the force, so that would be 55,000 numbers different from 2018 in terms of the 980 number would go to 1035, and the United States Marine Corps instead would basically have 2,400 different. When you look at, instead of 182, the active Marine Corps would be 184, and the Marine Corps Reserve, instead of being 38.5, would be 38.9. So my question is this, if we were able to get that done, please explain to my colleagues and the American people how this would impact readiness. Explain to us what you would do, Army, Marine Corps generals, in terms of this increased end strength. What would that mean for the formations? How would that address the risk? And what would that mean to the families in terms of deployment and dwell? Thank you.
Thanks, Congressman. Well, in terms of readiness, it would, I think, assist us with the deployment dwell and buy time, because you'd have the capacity of the force to do the day-to-day op tempo. Because as the wars draw down in Iraq and Afghanistan, they didn't end, but they came down considerably, but so didn't the size of the force. So the op tempo, the dep tempo for the Army has remained very high. We're still at, 1-to-1 or 1 to just a little bit less than 2 in some capacity. So time is critical to building readiness, the time to train, the time to rebuild the force. It would also, I think, probably allow for an increased number of capabilities, not necessarily brigade combat teams, but various other capabilities. Earlier, people talked about Patriot. Patriot's one of our significantly increased or high-stress units. And then on the families, it would clearly reduce some of the op-tempo stress on a day-to-day basis. So if that were to happen, that would be wonderful. We would welcome it. But again, I just caution everybody, it would have to come with the dollars associated with it in order to fund the readiness, in order to fund the modernization associated with those forces.
Congressman, I think it would do two things. It would, if we increase the number of like units, it would improve our depth to dwell, which gives us more time to train before we deploy again, which overall improves our readiness. Reduces stress on the force and stress on families. That said, we're in a process right now, and we're looking at what the force design looks like. And because I think we've realized, because we've been doing what we've been doing successfully, but we have to look for the future. Do we have the right force design for the future? Do we have the right number of Marines doing the right things? Do we have enough people that do information warfare, do electronic warfare, do cyber? Do we have enough communicators, enough intel analysts? And I think the answer is no. And so we would probably take that number of people and use them to get those types of Marines, which would add those capabilities to make the force better and more ready and better prepared to go face the conflicts we think that we have the highest probability of operating in the future.
Well, I appreciate those comments, and for the record, both general officers talked about the impact on service members and their families. A lot of emphasis here in the Congress has to do with post-traumatic stress, TBI, and other associated concerns for our veterans, and this bill, fully funded, would help address it, and also in terms of the European Reassurance Initiative, concerns with the Islamic State, dealing with North Korea, some challenges potentially with China. This is a very important bill that we need to muster the political will to pass. I thank the panelists. Yield back.
Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to begin by thanking a wide array of distinguished witnesses before us today, and we certainly appreciate both your insight and your dedication in service to our nation. So thank you for that. Secretary Mabus, and actually before that, if I could just acknowledge Mr. Murphy, and great to see you back before the committee and to have you with us today. So thanks for your service and what you're doing. Secretary Mabus and Admiral Richardson, with the resurgence of Russia and the ascendance of China and the role the Navy plays in the conflicts throughout the Middle East, there's obviously clear urgency to add more submarines to the fleet. In light of the impending submarine shortfall, can we count on efforts to extend the life of the Los Angeles-class boats, and how can we best direct our immediate and long-term investments to effectively mitigate any risks posed by the shortfall?
Number one, Congressman, the Russian activity that you were talking about is the highest level we've seen since the Cold War, and the op tempo for the Navy, and particularly for our submarine force, has been exceptionally high for at least the last decade. The number of submarines that we have today and the number that we're going to have into the 20s is an example of why it's so important not to miss a year in submarines. We've missed years building only one attack submarine, and we just can't make those years back up. Where we can focus now is, number one, on making sure that the submarines that we do have in service reach the end of their lifespan, the Los Angeles class that you mentioned in particular, that to the extent we can extend those, but to make sure that they reach that in a safe and effective manner. Number two, right now we're looking at one Virginia-class submarine in 21, because that's the year that the Ohio-class replacement begins to be built. We would very much like to and need to have a second Virginia-class in that year. We're undergoing the studies, the look right now to make that happen. And we simply need, as we go forward, to build more submarines, and particularly the attack submarines, and not let the Ohio-class replacement effort have an impact on so many of our other shipbuilding programs, and in particular the attack submarine program.
I couldn't agree more, Mr. Secretary, and I share that concern, and the faster we can get these boats into the water, obviously the better. And again, Secretary Mabus and Admiral Richardson, as you know, the last 8 Virginia-class submarines have been delivered ahead of schedule, and the program has been touted as a model for acquisition reform, largely due to the multi-year contracting strategy and its use of economic order quantities, something that I, along with my then colleague from Connecticut at the time several years ago, strongly advocated for that change, and how we bought and paid for our submarines, allowing for multi-year contracting, which had never been done before. Now, based on the initial industry estimates of the cost impact to module manufacturing, final assembly and testing, and the supplier base, the estimated long-term cost impact of an $85 million shortfall in AP funding in FY17 could be between $110 million and $210 million. So with this in mind, what ramifications might the Navy see should we fail to provide robust funding for advanced procurement for the Virginia-class submarine program, and how would the health of the force be affected?
Everything you pointed out shows why it's important to do these things 10 at a time as a multi-year buy, and we appreciate Congress allowing us to do that very much. Part of that multi-year buy is the advanced procurement, so that shipyards can buy in economic order quantity. And to show you the impact that something like that has, in 2014, when we signed the last multi-year for 10 subs over 5 years, we paid for 9 subs. So we basically got a submarine free because we, with the help of Congress, let suppliers buy in economic order quantity. They were able to keep and train the workforce that was going to be needed, they were able to make the infrastructure investments that they needed to make.
Thank you. I know my time's expired. I hope we're not going to let advanced procurement slip. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Welsh, welcome to the Armed Services Committee. The behavior in here is not always this good. We might need you back in a few weeks. But congratulations on your Easter Seals Award dinner. I apologize I didn't see you when I was congratulating General Welsh on it, and certainly look forward to having you back in Valdosta. I think it's been 10 months and 2 weeks since I saw you down there. I remember that because my baby was exactly 6 weeks old at that time, and so look forward to seeing you again in Valdosta, and General Welsh as well. General Milley, I read about the issue with regard to the pistols, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous that you don't have the authority to pick a pistol for the Army. I would bet that the 4 of you in uniform could probably in 10 minutes come up with an agreement on what that platform should be. I would think that with a quick click or two on an iPad, you could figure out what the retail price of the pistol was, what a decent price for the pistol was, and that what we should be paying for that pistol if we were buying it in the quantities that we would buy it in. And I want you to know that I do believe you should have that authority, and I can't help but wonder that if it's this bad with a pistol, what about optics? What about rifles? I mean, all of the things that we're buying, how much bureaucracy is in there that we could remove that would allow you to equip your men and women better, faster, and with less money?
Thanks, Congressman. And you're correct. The pistol is only one of the systems, and it's symptomatic of the system writ large. First of all, we do, Secretary of the Army and I do have the authority to pick the weapon, but it's not, that's at the end of the day. The problem is getting to the end of the day and how long it's taken. So this thing's been going on for like 9 years, and you've heard the whole litany of woe, about 300 pages and so on and so forth. The test itself is 2 years long on known technology. We're not talking about nuclear subs or going to the moon here. We're talking about a pistol. So yes, it's a long drawn-out process. It's not as adaptive. It's not as agile. It's not as quick. We don't have as many authorities. There's a lot of legal requirements and oversight and so on and so forth. We, the Army, would like to cut to the chase a little bit more on some of these things. And in the case of the pistol, we happen to be the one who's the proponent. All the other services would use the pistol that we get. So
I would encourage all of you to get specific language that you would like to see in the National Defense Authorization Act that would help you cut through that red tape. I mean, I hear this from I heard it on the sniper fields at Benning with regard to what a scope can be purchased for over the internet versus what it costs to get the same scope on a rifle at a military base. Secretary Mabus, real quick, thank you for naming the series of ships after John Lewis, my colleague from Georgia. Nobody deserves it more. I want to go to Secretary James now with regard to the JSTARS, if I can. We've discussed the ISR shortfalls. I know we're making progress with the JSTARS. My concern still is the ISR gap between the old platform of JSTARS and fielding the new platform of JSTARS, and how we intend to close that gap, and what suggestions that either you or General Welsh have for closing that gap.
So again, let me begin, and then I'll yield to the chief. Just a couple of data points. I mentioned we are getting going now with the recap of JSTARS. It's taken too long for a variety of reasons, but in this 5-year plan, we do have it funded. So that's point one. We have 3 contractors already that are under contract that are doing pre-EMD types of technology maturation, risk reduction types of activities, and we believe that we will get a contract awarded for EMD, engineering, manufacturing, and development, in about the first quarter of FY18. It is one of those high demand, low density areas, and you're right, combatant commanders want JSTARS, and they want that equivalent as well, a lot. So we're moving forward with it, and regrettably, it's taken as long as it has.
Congressman, I think by the time we finish this risk reduction work and the technology maturation work in FY17, and we approach that EMD contract decision, we'll have a better idea of how much we can accelerate, if any, at that point in time. We would like to accelerate from a FY24 IOC and move it forward.
General, thank you for your time and for your many years of service. Ms. Welsh, good to see you again.
Mr. Gallego.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question's for General Neller. We now have 2 special purpose MAGTAFs, a new UDP requirement to Australia, the Black Sea Rotational Force, additional requirements for embassy security, and an uptick in exercise and security cooperation missions, and of course the regular MUs that our Marines go on. So I have 3 questions regarding the sustainability of this op-tempo. 1, is the current deployment to dwell ratio of 1 to 2 sustainable in terms of training and also just general retention of Marines? 2, will we have the ability to surge forces in the event of a full spectrum conflict? And 3, are there more opportunities, and I've brought this up in private with you, more opportunities to better leverage the reserves in any way to help in regards to the first 2 questions?
So, Congressman, based on the current force structure, we deployed the MUs to maintain a 1.0 presence for CENTCOM. There's also a forward deployed naval force MU in Okinawa, but that comes off of unit rotational forces. The BSURF and one of the special purpose MAGTAFs is one force, and the other one is in CENTCOM. So is it sustainable? At a 2-to-1 ratio, at 24 infantry battalions in the aviation logistics, yes, it is. We can sustain this. Ideally, when I came in the Marine Corps, we were a 3-to-1 force. We had 6 months deployed, 18 months to reset. We've been a 2-to-1 force. That is right at the very edge. And so when we do have some units that are inside that, and that's of concern. So can we surge? The force that can surge is the force that's getting ready to replace these units that are forward deployed, or the units that have just got back from these same deployments. And then there's always a life cycle to a unit, and the readiness ebbs and flows. It's a very kind of complicated algorithm involving people, the equipment, the readiness of the gear, the training of the unit. Depending upon what the requirement is and how much, we have an ability to surge, but those that have just gotten back and where they are in the training cycle, they would be the least prepared to surge. The bottom line is we're going to go. And, Marines are going to go, and we're going to go, and we're going to provide the best ready force that we can, because that's what you expect of your Marine Corps. So, and part of that surge is the reserves. The 38,500 Marines in the reserve component, which are part of the total force, just like with the Army, Navy, and the Air Force Guard and reserve, we're a total force. There's 2,400 reserve Marines activated today that are forward deployed. And they're out there as part of the 186,000 Marines, 184,000 active. So we wouldn't be able to do what we do without the reserves. To have the reserves surge, obviously we have to bring them on active duty, we got to mobilize them, and they have to be paid. And if we were to replace one of these capabilities with a reserve battalion or a reserve flight squadron, that's expensive, and that's where you get in the issue of using the reserves as effectively as we probably could.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank this panel for being here today. It is always enlightening to hear from you. Just a little disclosure here, I was an airman back right after the Wright brothers did their thing. But all 3 of my sons are currently in the Army, 2 active duty and 1 Black Hawk pilot in the Florida Army Guard. And so, that's an Army family from that standpoint. But this is for everyone. SOF is often referred to as the tip of the spear. And keeping with that analogy, the vast majority of the rest of the spear is provided by all of you, the service branches. Some in Congress believe that national security could be provided much cheaper by investing a little more in SOCOM and cutting a lot more from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. I know that without the enormous share of the service support you contribute to SOCOM, SOF doesn't function. And while digging for hard data to support both your traditional and special operations support expenses, I was surprised to discover that none of the branches have a comprehensive list of common service support they contribute to SOF, or understanding of what it really costs for you to annually support SOF. So in this year's NDA, I'm pursuing language that would direct each service to identify the support that they give and how much it costs, because what I want to make sure is that you're resourced properly, and that, you know, this, I think sometimes misguided aspect that SOF can solve all of our problems, you know, if we're going to resource SOF, then how does it affect, and we don't want it being taken from the general services. So if you could, and like I said, we've checked, would you support that in regards to that kind of language?
Well, for the Army, absolutely, sure. We can, in fact, it's a great idea to come up with a list of how we're supporting SOF, because as General Votel testified, I think it was last week, and I can certainly attest to that, is that the United States military's special operations forces depend upon the parent services of all of us and the conventional forces for their very existence, not only in their training, in their manning, in their equipping, but also operationally. It's much, much more difficult for them to operate when they're out there just by themselves, but when they've got an architecture around them of conventional forces, air, naval, and land, then they're much more effective.
Sir, the Navy would absolutely support that.
So we would support it, and I just, again, I think all of us realize we're part of a joint team.
Right.
And we need the SOF guys and gals to do what they do, and as General Milley said, and General Votel, I'm sure would validate that they can't do what they do without us being there to provide the capabilities. So we operate as a joint force. And I think, quite frankly, there's a lot of things that conventional, and I don't really like that term, but conventional forces do that are part of what are perceived or seen as what the SOF is doing, particularly in Iraq and other places where we're involved in advising and assisting and training foreign militaries. But it's not about the credit, it's just about, we work with each other, and I'd be certainly willing to show what the costs are.
John Walsh.
Yes, sir, we completely agree with that. By the way, the good news for all of us is the greatest spokesman for this necessity of a strong conventional forces for SOF is the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command.
Absolutely.
And has been for a while.
And he's repeated that on numerous occasions, that, you know, SOF is great. It can do certain things and do them really well, but they can't reopen the Straits of Hormuz. They can't withstand an assault by a conventional force. You know, so there's limitations, and we need to have all of that as a joint task. One last thing, and I appreciate when you talk about readiness in regards to deterrence. I truly believe, and this is just, you know, an old sheriff saying this, that, you know, when you have a high deterrence, it does deter nation-state actors from doing something that's really stupid, I think. It's not going to stop, you know, the knuckleheads out there that are non-conventional, but it really does have a direct impact. You know, I have a son currently over in Europe and for 6 months and supporting what's going on over there. We're not fooling anybody, you know, as it relates to Putin in regards to what force structure we have. And so I think that as the Army moves forward in regards to having pre-positioned assets there, but also actually having the old terminology, boots on the ground to respond, is you can't do it from afar, particularly in a conventional force. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the extra time, and I appreciate all of you being here. God bless you. Thank you.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to reiterate my thanks to all of you for being here today and for being so patient with us. Secretary Mabus, I want to talk to you about my favorite topic, the littoral combat ship. You testified before the Senate committee yesterday and reiterated the Navy's need for 52 littoral combat ships. You'll recall very well that 2 years ago, you undertook a study at the direction of the then Secretary of Defense of the entire LCS program and recommended 52 ships, but the latter 20 be the upgraded frigates. We had Secretary Stackley before the Sea Power Subcommittee a couple weeks ago, and he said there is no new study that validates a downsize to 40. So what I'd like for you to respond to is, in light of all of that, what would be the negative impacts of a reduction of the LCS program from 52 to 40?
Well, first, it's absolutely correct that we have a validated need. The force structure assessment says we need 52 small surface combatants, and your discussion of the study that was undertaken because of concerns with lethality and survivability, and literally thousands of alternatives were looked at. We came out, the frigate program, the last 20 are going to be far more survivable, far more lethal, and we're going to be able to backfit some of the original LCSs with that survivability and lethality. Anytime you reduce the numbers in a shipbuilding program, number one, the price goes up for what you're gonna get. If we down select only one version, one shipyard would almost certainly close. One of the things that we have learned and other countries have learned, and it's a hard lesson, is that if you lose these unique skills, it's almost impossible to get them back. It takes years, it takes far more to get them back than it does to maintain them. Number three, the way that the 52 number was arrived at is looking at all the missions that are required from the Navy and what it takes to meet that. That goes from everything from high-end combat against a near-peer competitor to the presence operations that we have ongoing every single day of the year to do what Mr. Nugent just said, deter and reassure, to the things like disaster relief, humanitarian assistance, and also we're very lacking in ships and SOCOM on the drug interdiction front. So looking at all the needs that the Navy has, those would be the impacts if you reduced those in absolute numbers. And again, what we're talking about now, we're talking about the fleet of the future. We're not talking about the fleet of today. We're talking about the workforce of the very near future, but the fleet of the future, how many ships we have, what their capabilities are, how they can meet the strategy, is dependent on that force structure analysis. We did the one in 2012. We refreshed it in 2014. And a lot of people, myself included, have been willing to bet the C&O's paycheck that that number of the one we're doing today, right now, that the number 308 is not going to go down. And so even if you look at keeping 308 as a number, if you look at the 30-year shipbuilding plan, if you reduce numbers of any type of ship, you simply don't meet the requirement.
And that was a good lead into my question for you, Admiral, and that is that if you look at the shipbuilding plan with the recommendation of administration, we get to 308, but then within a short period of time, we go down precipitously. So if we want to avoid dipping down pretty quickly under the 308 after we get there, aren't we going to have to continue to build these littoral combat ships at the 52 level instead of going down to 40?
Well, certainly, sir, and that's exactly that that fact of shipbuilding, that they come out of service as fast as they went in when they reach the end of their service life. You can extend that a little bit, but eventually they're going to come out at that same rate. And so you have to be minding the decisions of the past, putting together a program that is very thoughtful in terms of reaching and maintaining the requirements of the future. Underneath that 308 number is the composition of that number that's important as well, and the small surface combatant is an important contribution.
Well, thank you for that answer, and I do not want to bet your paycheck. I want you to keep your paycheck, but we want to keep building these ships, too.
I should be clear that after Mrs. Richardson and our 5 kids get their cut, there's very little discretionary money left in that paycheck. So,
With that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for your service and your patience during this long hearing. Mr. Murphy, I want to start off with you, talking about the WASP, these amazing women who served in World War II as pilots, 1,074 of them, pioneers, opened the door for people like me to be able to serve. Do you believe that they should be allowed to be in Arlington?
Yes.
Do you believe you have the authority to let them into Arlington quickly?
Yes, to an individual exception of policy.
How about just as a group, the WASP? We want to let the WASP into Arlington because of the amazing service that they did.
No, ma'am, and that's why I support your legislation. It's why I've done another course of action. Again, you know, ma'am, we all take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And that Constitution, we have the rule of law. I cannot violate law or U.S. regulations. U.S. regulations right now, and I know I'm not trying to give you mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, that's okay.
But
I hear you.
But ma'am, that's why I support your legislation. That's why I'm supporting a commission to address it. But the quickest way to do this would be individual exception policy. These women, Air
That's
Force
not what we're
service
looking
pilots
for, Mr. Murphy.
are here as. I'm sorry.
We're looking for all the WASP to be able to let in. And just to be
Yes.
clear, so you're saying you can't make that happen right now for all the WASP. Can the Secretary of Defense?
No.
Can the Commander-in-Chief?
No.
You believe nobody in the executive branch has the
Congress can.
authority to
The
make an
Congress can.
exception?
Ma'am, the Congress can. Ma'am, and the WASP were not treated. I'm trying to right the wrong, ma'am. I agree with you. I support you 100%. But Congress in 1977 changed, after decades of service, they allowed WASP to be buried in veteran cemeteries.
Do you really believe the Commander-in-Chief doesn't have the authority right now? I mean,
he also
makes
takes
executive
support and
orders all the
defend
time that he
Constitution. I know
can't say the WASP are allowed, or a group exception to policy.
individual exceptions to policy, ma'am.
So
they can,
if I
but not
submitted
group.
an exception to policy for 1,074 of my closest friends, would that be considered?
I would support that legislation, like I support your current legislation, as long as it's an above-the-ground interment, yes.
So you think it literally does take an act of Congress as the fastest way to fix a problem?
There was an act of Congress in 1977, ma'am, in 1977, which said they were allowed to be buried in veteran cemeteries, but they precluded them from being, they didn't allow them to be buried in Arlington, ma'am. But what I'm saying is Congress needs to change what Congress did in 1977. I can't change it unilaterally. SecDef can't change it unilaterally. The Commander-in-Chief can't. That's why we have co-equal branches of government.
Okay.
Now, I support your efforts.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify whether you thought the executive branch had any ability to change it right now. And
To
the
my
answer is no.
understanding, I need to talk common law at West Point. For my counsel and everything I've researched in support of your efforts, yes, ma'am.
Okay,
And I know
thank
it's not the answer you want to hear.
That's
but
all right.
That's the
I
answer.
just wanted to get the answer on the record. So,
Okay.
all right, Secretary James, it's great to see you last week at Davis-Monthan. Thanks for coming out to visit General Welch. I only have a couple minutes left. I do want to follow up on the A-10. Thank you for not trying to put the A-10 in the boneyard this year and continuing to keep it flying, although I am concerned about the future plans. And there seems like there's some inconsistencies within the Pentagon. When the Secretary of Defense announced his budget, before we actually saw the details, he said the A-10 won't be retired until 2022, and his quote was, they'll be replaced by F-35s only on a squadron-by-squadron basis as they come online, ensuring that all units have sufficient backfill to retain enough aircraft needed to fight today's conflict. So we got the impression, as the F-35 became FOC, squadron by squadron, after 2022, that would happen. When we actually got the budget and we saw the plans of the Air Force, we see that starting in FY18, actually 2 squadrons are going in the boneyard, 19, 49 more aircraft, 20, 64 more aircraft, and 21, 96 more aircraft. Last August, the Test and Evaluation Office, Dr. Gilmore, agreed that there was going to be a fly-off between the A-10 and the F-35 to compare capabilities side by side. The earliest that'll happen is F-18. They think maybe even 19. By the time we get a report to Congress, that'll be 20. Our perspective is that we shouldn't put one more A-10 in the boneyard until this test is complete and we actually have a report to assess any sort of risks, and then we move forward. It seems like there's just a number of inconsistencies in the timing here. Are you not willing to wait until the test is complete to make a decision to move forward on putting in any more A-10s in the boneyard?
This is once again a budgetary issue, and I'll let the chief talk about how the SecDef's comments relate to the squadrons of the F-35. So we'll come back to that. I was impressed with the boneyard, by the way. I was impressed with everything that I saw at Davis-Monthan. It is strictly a budgetary matter. It was last year and the year before as well, and you're right. Our 5-year plan does begin in FY18 gradually to retire the A-10.
Chief, you got any comment? I mean, when Dr. Gilmore mentioned the fly-off, you said, I think, let me just make sure that is you, the idea that the F-35 is going to walk in the door next year when it reaches IOC and take over for the A-10 is just silly. It's never been intent. We're never going to do that. That's not the plan. And really gearing more towards FOC, which we're talking much further down the road.
Yes, ma'am. And the idea, the F-35 is intended to be the high-threat CAS platform. We are losing CAS capacity. That's what the Budget Control Act has done to us. The real issue in 18, and the reason that we start the divestiture in 18, and I can't account for why Secretary of Defense's comments were this way, but the plan has been the same since it was submitted with our budget, is that the workarounds we put in place till now allow us to bed down the F-35 through IOC by getting maintenance manpower from other places by contracting it out. In FY18, all those things kind of run out, and we're now short people to stand up F-35 units. And so if we keep the A-10 by FY21, the scheduled FOC date for the F-35, we will be about 50% short of the maintenance manpower required to field the F-35. So it's a manpower problem.
Okay, I'm over my time, but we'll follow up with you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I came back because great interest in our military, to have a strong military, with the hopes that a strong military can make sure that we get the attention of foreigners who want to attack America in foreign countries. It's pretty distressing, really, to hear the testimony today, knowing that our readiness, knowing that our modernization accounts need money, need to really rebuild this military, that most Americans, including myself, feel like we need to have a strong military because of the world situation. I want to touch on, then I'll get to my question very quickly. Many of my colleagues on the Armed Services Committee don't agree with me on this, and that's fine. That's what makes America great. I just get incensed by the waste of money in Afghanistan. I had the former Commandant, Chuck Krulak, has been my advisor for 5 years. I email him, he emails me back. He gives me questions from time to time, or he will give me thoughts that I can share. In the last 2 weeks, this article appeared, 12 ways your tax dollars were squandered in Afghanistan. $10 billion. Then there was an article about the fact we spent $18 billion in Afghanistan to train Afghanis to be policemen, and 36,000 walked off the job. Then you had John Sopko before the Senate a month ago testifying that the Department of Defense spent $6 million to buy 9 goats from Italy. They're blonde in color, to ship to Western Afghanistan so they could start a goat farm and get the wool and then start a cashmere business. He further testified to the Senate he doesn't know where the goats are. And someone asked him, do you think they ate them? You know, this is not a joke. I hear you telling us today that America is not ready to defend this country if we keep going down this path. So this is what I want to ask. General Dunford, I have great respect for, as I have great respect for you as well. I know that from time to time, he wants your counsel because he's got the responsibility to say to a president, Mr. President, this is the right policy. We must continue this policy. Or maybe he would say, Mr. President, I don't know if we should continue going down this black hole or not. So what I'd like to know from you, primarily the generals, because you would be the ones, maybe the secretaries as well, that from time to time, General Dunford would say, we need to have a policy discussion. And I would understand it would be confidential and informal. But do you, as a general, feel that if a policy, forget my position on Afghanistan, but a policy that this country is pursuing is wrong for the American people and wrong for the military, would you feel that it is your duty, not publicly now, but your duty to say to General Dunford in this case, you need to let the President know that 10 to 12 more years of trying to train the Afghans to take care of themselves is not worth one dime, and it's certainly not worth one pint of blood. Do you feel that this is part of your responsibility? Forget Afghanistan, but to be an advisor
to the president so we can give the president the support or not give him the support, meaning money, in a lost cause? Would anyone like to answer that?
Congressman, you can get a quick spot from all of us, I suppose. For me, we meet regularly with General Dunford, very candid conversations amongst the senior leadership you see here at the table. We talk policy, we talk all kinds of strategic issues, very candid, and I have no doubt in my mind, speaking for myself, that if I had a doubt in a certain policy, et cetera, that I would bring it up to him, and I have already done that on many occasions. Point one. Point two is we also have an obligation to render best military advice to the Secretary of Defense, the President, National Security Council, and Congress. And I believe that I recognize that, and I accept that as a personal responsibility, and I will execute it without failure as long as I'm in this seat.
General Milley, thank you very much. I think my time is about to expire, and I tell the chairman all the time I'm going to try to stick to the time. So thank you for at least listening. I appreciate that very much.
I appreciate that. Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your service. There's been a lot of talk in the Senate on changing Goldwater nickels. In fact, our Senate colleagues have started hearings on that. Now, from your perspective, I'm going to ask General Welsh and Secretary James this in particular, because one of the wild rumors that are now flying around is that SpaceCom is going to be moved, or NorthCom and SouthCom are going to be merged, or who knows what other rumors are out there. Is this proposed Senate process sufficiently transparent and deliberative? Those are two things I think are critical. Could you both comment on that, please?
I would begin, Congressman Lamborn, by simply saying that I'm not fully familiar with the full Senate process. I'm sure it is transparent and so on. But any law that's been around for 30-plus years, it probably makes sense to stand back and take a look at it. So I believe that was the spirit with which they have initiated this. And by the way, the Department of Defense is also reviewing some of these matters, and there are working groups and so on. So that would be my comment.
Sir, like the boss, I'm not familiar with the internal Senate process on this, so I really can't comment on that. We have been asked for our views and our inputs, which I think is wonderful. The one thing I would comment on about Goldwater nickels is sometimes we forget that it's been a raging success, in my view.
Excuse me?
It's been a raging success.
Yeah.
Since 1986. The joint capabilities of this force are night and day compared to what they were in 1985, and all of us were serving back then. So I hope we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I don't think that will happen, but it's been 30 years. It's time to take a look and see how we make it better.
All right, thank you both for your perspective. Now, General Neller, I'd like to shift to you. I want to turn to Secretary Carter's recent decision to open all specialties and units to women without exception. And I'm concerned about the very rapid implementation timeline that's been given to you. And to me, if it's a very quick timeline, I would be concerned that there is more politics involved than actually what is best for the warfighter. So I want to ask you about the timeline. If there's too quick of a timeline to implement, does that make it difficult to resolve all of the questions?
Well, Congressman, I don't think we were on a timeline for a decision. The Secretary said by 1 April he would tell us, he would accept our implementation plans, which he's done. So we had been building in parallel an implementation plan because we did not ask for an exception for all ground combat elements, but now they're all open. So we're going through the process like the other services to find out what the propensity to enlist is. We've developed standards for men and women in the pool to go in these MOSs. We've got standards that when they're in recruit training that they have to meet in order to go on to the MOS school. We've got MOS-specific standards at the school that all Marines have to go through to earn the MOS. And then if and when female Marines pass, which I'm sure they will, we have a plan to successfully put them into these units so that they can contribute, and then we can continue on with mission effectiveness. So there's three lenses we look at this at the end: the mission effectiveness of the unit, the health and welfare of the force, and the overall best use of talent or the human capital that we have. So we're going to go through this process. Our recruiters are out there now. to see if there's any indications that there's a propensity to do these particular MOSs, and we'll put people through school. So how long is that going to take? I have no idea. But I think we've got a plan. I think we're prepared to go forward on this, and we'll continue to track it. I think it's going to take all of us, but I think more so the Army and the Marine Corps. I'm not going to speak for General Milley, but I think we know we're going to collect the data on this, and so we'll see how this all plays out over the next 5 to 10 years before we really have a good idea of how it's worked out.
Well, I just hope that the needs of the warfighter are first and foremost, and rushing too quickly, to me, might compromise that. I would hate to see that compromise.
I don't personally feel under any pressure, and I don't think the force does, because we want every Marine to be successful, and this is about mission effectiveness and effectiveness of the force.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
We've touched on a variety of topics. I appreciate y'all being here. We will need to stay in touch with you moving towards markup and the floor, everything from Goldwater Nichols and acquisition reform to dealing with our readiness problem. But for now, again, you have our thanks, and the hearing stands adjourned.